Welcome to my channel Midnight Stories, where you find horror stories that scare you. Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. This happened in the 1990s, specifically in 1994. I was Austin Pelkey, and my life changed forever that summer. The Catskill Mountains loomed before me as I drove my beat-up Honda Civic along winding roads, the last remnants of city life fading in my rearview mirror. It was June 2016, and at 22 years old I was embarking on what I hoped would be a temporary adventure, a chance to save some money and figure out my next move after college. My Uncle George's offer of a cheap place to stay in Arkville, a tiny town nestled in the heart of the mountains, seemed like a godsend at the time. Fresh out of school with a useless liberal arts degree and mountains of student debt, I was desperate for any opportunity to avoid moving back in with my mom in Queens. The cabin came into view as I rounded a bend, a weathered structure of dark wood and stone that looked like it had been there for a century. My uncle stood on the porch, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun. As I pulled up, he raised a hand in greeting, his face creased with a mixture of warmth and something else I couldn't quite place. Worry? Apprehension? "Welcome to the sticks, kid," he said as I climbed out of the car, stretching my legs after the long drive. "Hope you're ready for some peace and quiet." I laughed, but it came out more nervous than I intended. "Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. Might go stir-crazy without the constant noise of the city." George's expression softened slightly. "You'll get used to it. The silence has a way of growing on you." He paused, his gaze drifting to the tree line beyond the cabin. "Just remember, Austin, the woods aren't always as peaceful as they seem. Respect them and they'll respect you back." I nodded, chalking up his cryptic warning to typical old-timer superstition. If only I had known then how prophetic those words would turn out to be. The next few days were a blur of unpacking and settling in. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with modern amenities like Wi-Fi that made me feel less cut off from civilization. George showed me around town, if you could call it that. Arkville was little more than a main street with a handful of shops, a diner, and a gas station. The hardware store where I'd be working stood at the far end, a faded sign proclaiming Johnson's Hardware in peeling paint. "Not much to look at," George admitted as we drove back to the cabin, "but the people here are good folks. Just don't expect them to warm up to you right away. They can be a bit wary of outsiders." I soon learned the truth of that statement. My first week at Johnson's was an exercise in awkward silences and suspicious glances. The owner, a taciturn man named Bill, seemed to communicate entirely in grunts and nods. The only person who showed me any real kindness was Melanie, a girl about my age who worked the register. Melanie was different from the others. She had an energy about her that seemed out of place in this sleepy town. Her dark hair was often tied back in a messy ponytail, and her quick smile was a welcome contrast to the dour expressions I encountered elsewhere. "Don't mind them," she said one afternoon as we restocked shelves. "They'll come around eventually. This town, it takes a while to accept new people." "Why's that?" I asked, curious about the undercurrent of tension I'd sensed since arriving. Melanie's smile faltered for a moment. "It's complicated. Let's just say Arkville has a history and not all of it is pleasant." I wanted to press her for more information, but a customer interrupted us and the moment passed. Still her words lingered in my mind, adding to the growing sense that there was more to this town than met the eye. As the days stretched into weeks, I fell into a routine. Work at the hardware store, evenings spent gaming or binge-watching shows on Netflix, weekends exploring the surrounding wilderness, always careful to stay on marked trails, heeding George's warnings. It wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced before. George was often away on hunting or fishing trips, leaving me alone in the cabin for days at a time. I didn't mind the solitude, but there were nights when the silence of the forest pressed in on me, making the shadows seem deeper and more menacing. On those nights I'd find myself double-checking the locks, peering out into the darkness, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching me from just beyond the tree line. It was during one of these lonely evenings that I first heard it, a sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. I was sitting on the porch enjoying a beer and the cool night air when a low, guttural growl echoed from the woods. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite animal, not quite human, but something in between that sent a chill down my spine. I bolted inside, heart racing, and spent the rest of the night huddled on the couch, every creak of the old cabin making me jump. When morning came, I convinced myself it had been nothing more than an overactive imagination fueled by too many horror movies. But deep down, I knew. Something had changed that night. The peace I'd found in Arkville had been shattered, replaced by a gnawing unease that would only grow in the weeks to come. Little did I know that growl was just the beginning. The true horrors that awaited me in those mountains would test not only my sanity, but my very will to survive. July brought sweltering heat to the Catskills, the kind of oppressive humidity that clings to your skin and makes even the simplest tasks feel like monumental efforts. The hardware store became a refuge, its ancient air conditioning unit wheezing but mercifully functional. I found myself volunteering for extra shifts, partly for the cool air, but mostly to avoid being alone in the cabin. The incident with the strange growl had left me on edge. I hadn't heard it again, but the memory lingered, coloring my perception of the seemingly idyllic surroundings. The dense forests that had once appeared inviting now loomed ominously, hiding untold secrets in their shadowy depths. It was during one of these long, sticky evenings at the store that Melanie first invited me to join her and some friends for a bonfire by the lake. "Come on, city boy," she teased, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Time to see how we party out here in the sticks." I hesitated, thoughts of that night on the porch flashing through my mind, but Melanie's smile was infectious, and the prospect of actual social interaction was too tempting to pass up. "All right," I conceded, "but if I get eaten by a bear, I'm blaming you." She laughed, a sound that momentarily chased away the unease that had settled in my chest. "Trust me, Austin, the only thing you need to worry about out there is drinking too much of Randy's moonshine." Friday night arrived, and with it came a surge of nervous energy. George was heading out for another of his weekend trips, his truck loaded with camping gear and his trusty rifle. As I helped him pack, I couldn't shake the feeling that I should tell him about the growl, about the growing sense of wrongness that had taken root in me. "Hey, Uncle George," I started, my voice hesitant. "Have you ever heard anything strange out in the woods? Like, I don't know, weird animal noises or something?" George paused in his packing, his weathered face suddenly serious. "What kind of noises?" I shrugged, trying to play it off casually. "I don't know, probably nothing. Just thought I heard something weird the other night. Probably just a coyote or something, right?" My uncle's gaze bore into me, searching for something. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "Could be. Lots of critters out there make all sorts of sounds. But Austin," he placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. "If you ever hear or see anything that doesn't feel right, you trust that instinct. These woods, they're old, and they've got secrets. You understand?" I nodded, a chill running down my spine despite the summer heat. George's warning only amplified the unease I'd been feeling, but I pushed it aside. I was determined to have a normal night out with people my own age, to feel like a regular 22-year-old for once. As the sun began to set, I made my way down to the lake, following Melanie's directions. The bonfire was already roaring when I arrived, casting flickering shadows across the faces of a dozen or so people gathered around it. I recognized a few from town: Randy, the local mechanic's son, Katie, who worked at the diner, and a handful of others whose names escaped me. Melanie spotted me and waved me over, pressing a cold beer into my hand. "You made it. I was starting to think you'd chickened out." I grinned, taking a long swig of the beer. "And miss out on all this excitement? Not a chance." The night progressed, and I found myself relaxing for the first time in weeks. The beer flowed freely, conversation and laughter filling the air. It felt good to be around people my own age, to forget for a moment the strange undercurrent of unease that had permeated my time in Arkville. As the fire began to die down and the crowd thinned, Melanie suggested we take a walk along the shore. The moon hung low and full over the lake, casting a silvery glow across the water. We strolled in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle lapping of waves and the distant echoes of laughter from the remaining partygoers. "So," Melanie said finally, her voice soft in the night air, "what do you really think of our little town?" I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. "It's different, beautiful in its way, but there's something about it that I can't quite put my finger on, like there's more going on beneath the surface." Melanie nodded, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. "You're more perceptive than most outsiders. Arkville has its secrets, Austin, things that most people wouldn't believe if you told them." A chill ran down my spine, one that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "What kind of secrets?" Before Melanie could answer, a sound cut through the night, a low guttural growl that I recognized instantly. It was the same noise I'd heard that night on the porch, but closer now, more menacing. We froze, eyes scanning the tree line. The shadows seemed to shift and move, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw a pair of gleaming eyes watching us from the darkness. "Run," Melanie whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Now!" We took off, sprinting back towards the bonfire. Behind us, I heard the sound of something large crashing through the underbrush, pursuing us with inhuman speed. My heart pounded in my ears, every instinct screaming at me to go faster, to escape the nameless terror at our heels. We burst into the clearing where the bonfire had been, gasping for breath. The few remaining partygoers looked up in alarm, confusion etched on their faces. "What's wrong?" Randy asked, stumbling slightly as he stood. "You two look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to explain, the words tumbling out in a panicked jumble. "There's something out there, in the woods. It was chasing us. We need to get out of here." The others exchanged glances, skepticism clear in their expressions. "Come on, man," Katie said, rolling her eyes. "You probably just spooked yourselves. There's nothing dangerous out there except maybe a few raccoons." But Melanie shook her head vehemently. "No, he's right. I saw it too. We need to leave. Now." Perhaps it was the fear in her voice, or maybe they caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows beyond the dying fire. But something convinced them. We hurriedly gathered our things and piled into cars, tires kicking up gravel as we sped away from the lake. Melanie insisted on driving me home, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. We rode in tense silence, both lost in our own thoughts. As we pulled up to George's cabin, she turned to me, her face pale in the dashboard lights. "Austin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what we saw tonight, it's real. And it's not the first time it's happened. We need to talk, but not here, not now. Meet me at the diner tomorrow afternoon. There are things you need to know." I nodded, my mind reeling. As I watched her drive away, the shadows around the cabin seemed to press in closer, alive with malevolent intent. I hurried inside, double-checking every lock and window. Sleep eluded me that night. Every creak of the old cabin, every rustle of leaves outside sent my heart racing, and underneath it all, I could have sworn I heard that growl again, distant but unmistakable. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, I came to a chilling realization. The peaceful mountain town I'd come to escape my problems was harboring secrets far darker than I could have imagined, and somehow I had stumbled right into the middle of them. Little did I know the horrors I had glimpsed that night were only the beginning. The true test of my courage and my sanity was yet to come. The next day dawned bright and clear, the cheerful sunlight a stark contrast to the terrors of the night before. I moved through the morning in a daze, jumping at every unexpected sound, my mind replaying the events by the lake in an endless loop. As afternoon approached, I made my way to the diner, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. The place was nearly empty when I arrived, just a couple of regulars nursing coffee at the counter. Melanie sat in a booth at the far end, her face drawn and tired. She managed a weak smile as I slid in across from her. "You look about as good as I feel," she said, pushing a steaming mug of coffee towards me. I took a grateful sip, the bitter liquid doing little to calm my nerves. "Melanie, what the hell is going on in this town? What was that thing last night?" She sighed, her eyes darting around the diner as if checking for eavesdroppers. "It's complicated. And honestly, you probably won't believe me, but after what we saw, you deserve to know the truth." Over the next hour, Melanie unfolded a tale that sounded like something out of a horror novel. According to her, the forests around Arkville had been home to something for generations. The locals had different names for it. The beast, the wendigo, the forest walker. But whatever it was called, its presence had shaped the town's history for over a century. It's not always active, Melanie explained, her voice low. Sometimes years will go by without an incident. But when it wakes up, when it starts hunting, people disappear. Hikers, campers, sometimes even locals who should know better than to go too deep into the woods alone. I listened in stunned silence, part of me wanting to dismiss it all as an elaborate prank or shared delusion. But the memory of those gleaming eyes in the darkness, the inhuman speed with which it had pursued us, I couldn't deny the ring of truth in Melanie's words. So why doesn't anyone do anything about it? I asked. Call in the authorities, get some serious hunters out here to track this thing down. Melanie's laugh was bitter. You think we haven't tried? Over the years there have been attempts, but either the hunters disappear or they come back with nothing, claiming it was all a hoax. And the few times someone's managed to wound it, to really corner it. She shuddered. Let's just say it didn't end well for the town. What do you mean? 1937, she said, her eyes distant. A group of men from town, led by my great-grandfather, tracked the creature to its lair. They thought they had it trapped, but she trailed off, swallowing hard. The thing went berserk, tore through half the hunting party like they were tissue paper. And then it came for the town. Dozens died before it retreated back into the forest. Since then, there's been an understanding, I guess you'd call it. We don't go too deep into its territory, and it mostly leaves us alone. I sat back, my mind reeling. It was insane, all of it, and yet, does my uncle know about this? I asked suddenly, pieces starting to fall into place. George's cryptic warnings. His Melanie nodded grimly. Your Uncle George, he knows. He's one of the few people in town who's actually encountered the creature and lived to tell about it. It happened years ago, before you were born. He and a group of friends went camping deep in the woods in an area they shouldn't have. Only George made it back. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered George's words. These woods, they're old, and they've got secrets. Suddenly, his constant hunting trips took on a new, more ominous meaning. So what do we do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Just live with this thing out there, hoping it doesn't decide to come for us? Melanie shrugged, her expression a mixture of resignation and fear. That's what most people in town do. They pretend it doesn't exist, go about their lives. But some of us, we keep watch, try to warn people away from the dangerous areas, and if necessary, we fight back. As if on cue, the diner's door chimed, and a tall, broad-shouldered man walked in. He nodded to us as he passed, his eyes lingering on me with a look of curiosity and something else. Assessment? That's Frank, Melanie whispered after he'd settled at the counter. He's kind of the unofficial protector of the town. If anyone knows how to deal with the creature, it's him. I watched Frank out of the corner of my eye, noting the way he carried himself, alert, ready for action at a moment's notice. It was a stark reminder that in Arkville, danger could be lurking around any corner. As Melanie and I left the diner, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The beauty of it felt almost obscene now, knowing what lurked in the shadows beneath those majestic trees. Be careful, Austin, Melanie said as we parted ways. And if you hear or see anything unusual, don't hesitate to call me, day or night. I nodded, grateful for her friendship in this strange, terrifying new world I'd stumbled into. As I walked back to the cabin, every rustle in the underbrush, every snapping twig made me flinch. The forest that had once seemed so peaceful now felt like a green prison, hiding untold horrors just beyond my sight. That night, sleep eluded me once again. I tossed and turned, my mind conjuring images of gleaming eyes and razor-sharp claws. When I finally did drift off, my dreams were filled with chaotic flashes of blood and terror, of running through endless dark woods with something always just a step behind. I awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, to the sound of my phone ringing. It was George. Austin. His voice was tense, urgent. I'm coming back early. There's been an incident. I need you to stay in the cabin, understand? Don't go out. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Before I could ask any questions, he hung up. My heart raced as I peered out the window. The forest seemed to press in closer, the shadows deeper and more menacing than ever. Whatever was out there, whatever had haunted this town for generations, it was active again. And somehow I knew that my life in Arkville would never be the same. The hours crawled by as I waited for George to return, each minute stretching into an eternity of paranoid vigilance. Every creak of the cabin's old timber, every whisper of wind through the trees outside sent my heart racing. I found myself huddled on the couch, a kitchen knife clutched in my trembling hands, eyes fixed on the door. It was nearing dusk when I finally heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I peered out the window, relief washing over me as I recognized George's battered pickup. But as he stepped out of the truck, my relief turned to cold dread. His clothes were torn and dirty, and even from a distance I could see a makeshift bandage wrapped around his left arm, dark with what could only be blood. I threw open the door, rushing to help him inside. Up close, he looked even worse. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes haunted by something I couldn't begin to imagine. "Jesus, Uncle George, what happened?" I asked as I helped him to the couch. "Should I call an ambulance?" He shook his head grimly. "No hospitals. They'd ask too many questions." He winced as he settled onto the cushions. "It's not as bad as it looks. I've had worse." I retrieved the first aid kit from the bathroom, my mind reeling. As I helped George clean and properly bandage his wound, a series of deep gashes that looked disturbingly like claw marks, he filled me in on what had happened. He'd been out checking his traps when he'd come across signs of the creature. Massive tracks, trees scored with claw marks, the half-eaten carcass of a deer that had been torn apart with terrifying strength. He'd been so focused on the signs that he'd let his guard down, and the thing had nearly gotten the drop on him. "I got lucky," George said, his voice tight with pain as I tied off the bandage. "Managed to get a shot off, winged it. But Austin—" He gripped my arm, his eyes boring into mine. "It's angry now, and it's getting bolder. We found 2 hikers torn to pieces not 5 miles from town. This thing, it's escalating." A chill ran down my spine. "So what do we do?" George's expression hardened. "We hunt it down, end this, once and for all." The next few days were a blur of frantic preparation. George made calls, and soon our cabin became a hub of activity. Frank from the diner arrived, along with a handful of other grim-faced men and women I'd seen around town, but never really noticed before. They pored over maps, cleaned an alarming array of weapons, and spoke in low, urgent tones about tracking patterns and kill zones. I felt woefully out of my depth, a city kid suddenly thrust into a world of primal survival and ancient terrors. But I was determined to help, to not be a liability in the face of this threat. Melanie became a constant presence, her knowledge of local legends and tracking techniques proving invaluable. We spent long hours researching similar creatures in folklore, looking for any weakness we could exploit. The more we dug, the more terrifying our quarry became. Stories of impossible strength, of near invulnerability, of an intelligence that was decidedly inhuman in its cunning. "We're not dealing with some animal," Frank said one evening, his gruff voice cutting through the tense atmosphere of the cabin. "This thing, it thinks, it plans, and it's been playing a long game with this town for generations." The gravity of his words settled over us like a shroud. We weren't just hunting a predator. We were going to war with something that had successfully eluded and terrorized humans for over a century. As our preparations neared completion, a somber mood fell over the group. We all knew the risks, understood that some of us, maybe all of us, might not come back from this hunt. The night before we were set to head out, I found myself sitting on the porch, staring out at the dark line of trees that had become the border of my world. Melanie joined me, her presence a small comfort in the face of the unknown horrors that awaited us. "Are you scared?" she asked softly, her eyes reflecting the stars above. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Of course I was scared. I was terrified. But beneath the fear was something else, a determination I'd never felt before, a sense that this was something I had to do, not just for myself, but for everyone who called this place home. "It's okay to be scared," Melanie said, her hand finding mine in the darkness. "Being afraid keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. But Austin—" She turned to face me, her expression fierce in the moonlight. "Don't let the fear control you. Out there, hesitation means death. I squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her touch. I won't let you down, I promised, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. As we sat there, the night alive with the chorus of insects and the distant calls of nocturnal birds, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were perched on the edge of something monumental. In the space of a few short weeks, my life had transformed from a mundane struggle with post-college malaise to a life-or-death battle against an ancient evil. Part of me longed for the simplicity of my old life, for the problems that had seemed so insurmountable just a month ago, but now felt trivial in comparison. But as I looked at Melanie, as I thought of George and the others who had taken me in and trusted me with their secret war, I knew there was no going back. Tomorrow, we would venture into the depths of the forest, armed with determination and desperation in equal measure. We would face an enemy that had haunted these mountains since before our great-grandparents were born, a creature of nightmare-made flesh. And one way or another, this hunt would change everything. The pre-dawn air was crisp and heavy with mist as our group assembled at the edge of town. There were 12 of us in total: George, Frank, Melanie, myself, and 8 others, whose grim determination matched the gravity of our mission. We were armed with a mix of high-powered rifles, shotguns, and an assortment of bladed weapons that looked more at home in a medieval armory than in the 21st century. Frank went over the plan one last time, his voice low and intense. We would split into 3 teams, each taking a different route into the creature's suspected territory. The goal was to drive it towards a steep ravine where we hoped to corner it. "Remember," Frank said, his eyes meeting each of ours in turn, "this thing is smart, it's strong, and it's been doing this a lot longer than any of us. Stay alert, stick to the plan, and for God's sake, don't try to be a hero. We do this together or we don't do it at all." With final nods of understanding, we split up and headed into the forest. I was with George, Melanie, and a taciturn man named Hank, who I'd learned was the town's veterinarian. The irony of an animal doctor hunting a monster wasn't lost on me, but Hank's steady hands and knowledge of anatomy could prove crucial if we managed to wound the creature. The forest seemed to swallow us as we pushed deeper into its depths. The familiar trails quickly gave way to untamed wilderness, the trees growing denser and more gnarled with each step. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of leaves under our boots and the occasional call of a bird. As we walked, George pointed out signs of the creature's passage: broken branches, strange markings on tree trunks, and at one point a patch of fur caught on a thorny bush that made my skin crawl just looking at it. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher in the sky, though little of its light penetrated the thick canopy above. We moved carefully, every sense straining for any hint of our quarry. The weight of the shotgun in my hands was both reassuring and terrifying, a constant reminder of the danger we faced and the violence we were prepared to unleash. It was nearing midday when we heard it, a distant guttural roar that seemed to shake the very air around us. It was followed by the sharp crack of gunfire and panicked shouts. "That's Team 2, George said, his face grim. "Sounds like they've engaged." We quickened our pace, moving as fast as we dared through the treacherous terrain. The sounds of conflict grew louder, punctuated by more inhuman roars and the terrified screams of our comrades. We burst into a small clearing just in time to see a nightmarish scene unfold. The creature, a massive dark shape of muscle and matted fur, had one of the hunters in its grasp. With a sickening crunch, it tore the man's arm from his body as if it were made of paper. Time seemed to slow as the full horror of what we were facing became clear. The creature was easily 8 feet tall, with a twisted, almost human-like face distorted by a protruding snout filled with razor-sharp teeth. Its eyes, a sickly yellow, gleamed with an intelligence that was all the more terrifying for its inhumanity. For a moment we all stood frozen, our minds struggling to process the impossible scene before us. Then training and instinct kicked in. "Fire!" George roared, and the clearing erupted in a deafening cacophony of gunshots. The creature howled in pain and rage as bullets tore into its flesh. But instead of falling, it seemed to grow even more frenzied. With inhuman speed, it charged towards us, shrugging off shots that would have dropped an elephant. I raised my shotgun, my hands shaking so badly I could barely aim. I fired, the recoil nearly knocking me off my feet. The blast caught the monster in the chest, opening a gaping wound that began to close almost immediately. "Fall back!" Frank yelled from somewhere to my left. "Get to higher ground!" We retreated, firing as we went, more to slow the creature down than out of any real hope of killing it. I saw Melanie stumble, her foot caught in a tangle of roots. Without thinking, I rushed to her side, hauling her up just as the monster's claws slashed through the air where she had been. We ran, our lungs burning, the sound of pursuit unnervingly close behind us. The plan, what little of it remained, was in tatters. We were no longer the hunters. We were the prey, being herded deeper into the creature's domain. As we crashed through the underbrush, the ground beneath our feet suddenly gave way. We tumbled down a steep incline, a jumble of limbs and weapons and terror. When we finally came to a stop, battered and disoriented, we found ourselves in a ravine, its walls too steep and slick to easily climb. "Everyone okay?" George called out, his voice tight with pain. A chorus of groans answered him as we took stock of our situation. We had lost weapons in the fall, and those we still had were running low on ammunition. Frank was nursing what looked like a broken arm, and Hank was unconscious, a nasty gash on his forehead. But the worst realization was yet to come. As the dust settled and we regained our bearings, a chilling truth became apparent. We weren't alone in this ravine. There, half hidden in the shadows of an overhanging rock, was the entrance to a cave, and from its depths came a low, rumbling growl that turned my blood to ice. We hadn't driven the creature into a trap. It had led us straight to its lair. As the gravity of our situation sank in, I met Melanie's eyes. The fear I saw there mirrored my own, but beneath it was a steely determination. We were in the heart of darkness now, face to face with an ancient evil, and somehow we had to find a way to survive. The hunt had become a desperate fight for survival, and the true test of our courage and our humanity was about to begin. The ravine was eerily silent in the wake of our fall, the only sounds our ragged breathing and the steady drip of water from somewhere in the darkness. The cave mouth loomed before us, a black void that seemed to swallow what little light filtered down to where we stood. "We need to get out of here," Melanie whispered, her voice tight with fear. "That thing could be on us any second." But as we turned to look for a way up the steep walls of the ravine, a low, rumbling growl emanated from the cave. It was followed by the sound of heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, drawing nearer. "No time," George said grimly, hefting his rifle. "We make our stand here." We formed a ragged semicircle facing the cave entrance, those of us still armed readying our weapons. Frank, his arm hanging uselessly at his side, produced a wicked-looking knife from his boot. Hank was still unconscious, propped against a boulder and looking terrifyingly vulnerable. The creature emerged from the darkness with agonizing slowness, as if savoring our fear. In the dim light of the ravine, it looked even more nightmarish than before. Blood, both its own and that of our fallen comrades, matted its fur. Its yellow eyes gleamed with a predatory intelligence as it surveyed us, lips pulling back in a mockery of a smile to reveal rows of dagger-like teeth. For a long moment we stood frozen in a tableau of terror, hunter and hunted locked in a standoff. Then, with a roar that shook loose stones from the ravine walls, it charged. What followed was a chaos of blood, gunfire, and primal terror. We fought with everything we had, desperation lending strength to our arms and accuracy to our aim. But for every wound we inflicted, the creature seemed to grow only stronger, more enraged. I saw Frank go down, the monster's claws raking across his chest in a spray of crimson. George emptied his rifle into the creature's face, the bullets tearing chunks of flesh and bone, but somehow failing to stop its relentless advance. Melanie and I found ourselves backed against the ravine wall, my shotgun long since emptied, her knife seeming pitifully small against our monstrous foe. The creature turned its baleful gaze upon us, and in that moment I was certain we were about to die. But then, something unexpected happened. As the monster lunged towards us, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Hank, who we'd all assumed was still unconscious, had somehow gotten to his feet. With a yell that was equal parts terror and determination, he charged forward, plunging a syringe filled with some unknown liquid deep into the creature's flank. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The monster let out a shriek that was almost human in its agony, its body convulsing violently. It thrashed about, crashing into the ravine walls with enough force to send showers of loose rock raining down upon us. "Run!" Hank shouted, his face pale but set with grim satisfaction. "Whatever I gave it won't hold it for long." We didn't need to be told twice. Supporting the wounded as best we could, we scrambled towards a narrow fissure in the ravine wall that looked like it might lead to a way out. Behind us, the creature's howls of rage and pain echoed off the stone, spurring us on with renewed desperation. The fissure opened into a twisting tunnel, barely wide enough for us to squeeze through single file. We pushed on, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter but never quite fading away. The air grew thick and stale, the darkness absolute save for the feeble beams of the 2 flashlights that had survived our ordeal. After what felt like hours of stumbling through the claustrophobic passage, we emerged into a vast underground cavern. Our lights barely penetrated the gloom, but what they revealed was enough to stop us in our tracks. The cavern floor was littered with bones, some obviously animal, but many disturbingly human. Tattered remnants of clothing and camping gear spoke of decades, perhaps centuries of victims. But it was what lay at the center of the chamber that truly chilled my blood. There, arranged in a crude circle, were a series of stone monoliths covered in strange, twisting symbols that seemed to writhe and shift in the beam of our flashlights. And at the heart of this eldritch arrangement was a pool of inky black liquid that seemed to absorb all light that touched it. "Dear God," George whispered, his voice filled with a mix of awe and horror. "What is this place?" Before anyone could answer, a familiar roar echoed through the cavern. The creature had found us, and it was closing in fast. "There!" Melanie pointed to a narrow ledge that ran along the cavern wall, leading to what looked like another tunnel entrance high above. "If we can get up there, we might be able to lose it." We made for the ledge, our exhausted bodies protesting every step. Frank, barely conscious and leaning heavily on George, mumbled something about leaving him behind. George's response was a string of colorful curses as he half dragged, half carried his friend up the treacherous incline. We were halfway to the tunnel when the monster burst into the cavern. It paused for a moment, its yellowed eyes scanning the chamber before locking onto our retreating forms. With a bellow of triumph, it began to bound across the bone-strewn floor towards us. "Keep going!" I shouted, an insane plan forming in my mind. "I'll buy you some time." Before anyone could stop me, I turned and sprinted back down the ledge. I could hear Melanie screaming my name, but I forced myself not to look back. My eyes were fixed on the pool of dark liquid at the center of the stone circle. As I reached the cavern floor, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The creature was almost upon me, its massive form eating up the distance between us with terrifying speed. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, muscles screaming in protest. I reached the edge of the pool just as I felt the monster's hot breath on the back of my neck. Without hesitation, I dove forward, plunging into the inky blackness. The liquid was cold, so cold it felt like my skin was on fire. I thrashed about, trying to surface, but the pool seemed to have no bottom, no end to its lightless depths. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized I was drowning. And then something changed. The cold began to seep into my bones, into my very being. With it came flashes of something. Images, sensations, knowledge that no human mind was meant to comprehend. I saw vast, impossible geometries, heard whispers in languages that predated humanity by eons. I saw the truth of the creature we had been fighting, and the cosmic horror from which it had spawned. In that moment, suspended between life and death, sanity and madness, I understood. The monster wasn't just some forest predator. It was a guardian, a jailer of sorts, keeping watch over this nexus of eldritch power. And now, by entering the pool, I had become something else entirely. With a gasp that felt like my first breath and my last, I broke the surface of the pool. The cavern was in chaos. The creature was thrashing about, howling in what I now recognized as not rage, but fear. It could sense the change in me, the touch of something far older and more terrible than itself. I pulled myself from the pool, dark liquid sluicing off my body. I felt different, power thrumming through my veins like electricity. When I spoke, my voice echoed with an authority that didn't feel entirely my own. "Enough," I said. And to my amazement, the creature stilled, its yellow eyes now regarding me with something akin to reverence. My friends, if I could still call them that, stared at me in shock and growing unease. I knew I should feel relieved, triumphant even. We had survived. The threat was over. But as I stood there, dripping with eldritch fluid, the weight of cosmic knowledge pressing down upon my mind, I realized that our ordeal was far from over. In saving my friends, in saving the town, I had become something other than human. And the real horror, I now understood, was just beginning. The journey back to Arkville was a blur of exhaustion, pain, and an eerie silence that spoke volumes about the trauma we had all endured. I led the way, the creature following docilely behind like an obedient dog. My friends, if I could still call them that, kept their distance, their faces a mix of relief, confusion, and poorly concealed fear. As we emerged from the forest on the outskirts of town, the first streaks of dawn were painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. It should have been beautiful, a triumphant return of conquering heroes. Instead, it felt like the end of something profound, a line crossed that could never be uncrossed. Word of our approach spread quickly. By the time we reached the main street, it seemed the entire population of Arkville had turned out to meet us. There were gasps of shock, cries of fear, and more than a few hands reaching for hidden weapons as they caught sight of the monster in our midst. I raised my hand, and to my continued amazement, a hush fell over the crowd. When I spoke, my voice carried easily across the assembled townsfolk, resonating with an authority that felt alien even to my own ears. "The threat is over," I declared. "This creature will no longer harm anyone, but there are things you need to know, truths that have been hidden for far too long." Over the next few hours, as the wounded were tended to and the gravity of our ordeal sank in, I shared what I had learned in that moment of cosmic enlightenment in the underground pool. The history of Arkville, of the ancient and terrible things that slumbered beneath the mountains, was far stranger and more terrifying than anyone had imagined. The creature, the Wendigo as the townsfolk had called it, was but a symptom of a far greater cosmic infection. It had been created, or perhaps summoned, by the first settlers of the area as a guardian against forces they barely understood. Over generations, the knowledge of its true purpose had been lost, leaving only fear and superstition. As I spoke, I could see the disbelief in some faces slowly give way to a grim acceptance. This was a town built on secrets, after all. Finding out that those secrets went deeper than anyone had suspected was shocking, but not entirely surprising. But it was the reactions of my friends, of George and Melanie and the others who had ventured into the heart of darkness with me, that truly drove home the magnitude of what had happened. They looked at me with a mixture of awe and fear, as if seeing a stranger wearing the face of someone they once knew. Melanie was the first to approach me after my impromptu town hall meeting had dispersed. Her eyes, usually so warm and full of life, were guarded now, searching my face for any trace of the Austin she had known. "What happened to you in that pool?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I struggled to find words that could adequately convey the experience. "I saw everything," I finally said. "The beginning, the end, the vast cosmic forces that shape our reality. And I understood my place in it all." She reached out tentatively, her hand hovering just shy of touching my arm. "Are you still you?" It was a simple question, but one that cut to the heart of my new existence. Was I still Austin Pelkey, the directionless college grad who had come to Arkville looking for a fresh start? Or had I become something else entirely, a vessel for knowledge and power beyond human comprehension? "I don't know," I admitted, and the uncertainty in my voice seemed to pain her more than any confirmation of change could have. In the days that followed, a new normal began to settle over Arkville. The creature, now docile and obedient to my will, was kept in a hastily constructed enclosure on the outskirts of town. People gave it a wide berth, but there was a growing curiosity about this being that had terrorized them for so long. I found myself thrust into a position of leadership, my newfound knowledge making me the de facto expert on the supernatural forces at work in the area. It was a role I never would have imagined for myself, and one that sat uneasily on my shoulders. George tried his best to act as a buffer between me and the growing demands of the townsfolk, but I could see the worry in his eyes, the way he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking. He had lost a nephew and gained, what, a prophet? A potential threat? As for me, I struggled daily with the weight of the knowledge I now carried. The visions I had experienced in the pool haunted my dreams, fragments of cosmic truth that threatened to overwhelm my sanity if I dwelled on them too long. I found myself withdrawing from others, spending long hours in solitary contemplation of mysteries that no human mind was meant to unravel. 1 month after our fateful expedition into the woods, I made a decision. I couldn't stay in Arkville. The town needed time to come to terms with its true history, to find a way forward that acknowledged the reality of the forces surrounding it. And I needed to understand what I had become, to find a way to reconcile my humanity with the vast, terrifying knowledge that now resided in my mind. I left in the pre-dawn hours, leaving behind only a note explaining my decision. The creature followed me to the town limits, its yellow eyes regarding me with what I could now recognize as a mix of respect and relief. It too had been changed by our encounter, freed from its age-old duty but uncertain of its place in the world. As I stood at the crossroads leading out of Arkville, I allowed myself one last look back at the town that had changed everything for me. The first rays of sunlight were just beginning to peek over the mountains, bathing the valley in a golden glow that belied the dark secrets hidden beneath its surface. I thought of Melanie, of George, of all the people I was leaving behind. Part of me ached to stay, to help them navigate the new reality they found themselves in. But a larger part knew that my path now lay elsewhere. With a deep breath, I turned and began walking, my steps carrying me away from Arkville and towards an uncertain future. The knowledge I carried was both a burden and a responsibility, one that I knew would shape the rest of my life. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The horrors we had faced in Arkville were but a small part of a larger cosmic tapestry, one that I was now inextricably woven into. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever nightmares still lurked in the shadows of our world, I knew that I would face them with open eyes and a determination to understand. For in understanding, I had learned, lay our only hope of survival in a universe far stranger and more terrifying than we had ever imagined. This happened in the 1990s, 1993 to be exact. The thing about living out here in Montana is, you get used to a certain kind of silence. It's the kind that creeps up on you, where the only sound is your own breathing. That year, I found myself in one of those moments, standing just outside of my cabin, listening to that eerie quiet. My name's Travis, and for most of my life I'd rather been alone than around people. Guess that's why I moved out here to this part of the Rockies, where the nearest neighbor was a solid 30 miles away. I was 32 then, old enough to know better, but young enough to still make stupid decisions. The cabin had been my home for the past 3 years, a refuge from a world that never seemed to fit quite right. It wasn't much, just a 2-room structure with a small kitchen and a bedroom that doubled as a living area. But it was mine, and out here that meant something. The day everything changed started like any other. I woke up with the sun, made a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and stepped out onto my porch to survey the land. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth that I'd come to associate with home. But something felt off. It wasn't just the quiet, though. It was the way the air felt heavier, like something had settled over the forest, watching. I tried to shake off the feeling, chalking it up to too many nights alone with nothing but my thoughts for company. I had work to do. The woodpile wasn't going to stack itself, and winter in these parts didn't mess around. So I grabbed my axe and made my way over to the chopping block. The rhythmic thunk of metal on wood usually helped clear my head, but not today. With each swing, I felt like eyes were boring into my back. I'd pause, scan the tree line, but there was nothing, just that damn silence. It was during one of these pauses that I noticed the first tracks. They were huge, bigger than any bear or mountain lion tracks I'd seen in my time out here. At first, I thought maybe some animal had wandered closer to my cabin, but the shape was all wrong. The prints were elongated, clawed at the ends like something had been digging into the earth with each step. I squatted down to get a closer look, brushing aside some of the fallen leaves, and that's when I noticed something else. Blood. A lot of it smeared on the dirt like something had been dragged through the clearing. I've tracked game before, deer, elk, the usual, but this wasn't anything I could recognize. My heart started pounding in my chest, a primal fear response kicking in that I hadn't felt since I was a kid. Whatever made these tracks, whatever left this blood, it wasn't natural. And it was close. Too close. The blood trail led deeper into the forest, toward the thickest part of the trees. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to go back inside, to lock the door and wait it out. But there was another part of me, a part I thought I'd left behind in the city, that was curious. That wanted to know what the hell was out there in my woods. I stood there for a long moment, the axe heavy in my hand, weighing my options. In the end, curiosity won out over caution. I headed back to the cabin, my eyes never leaving the tree line, and grabbed my rifle. It was an old Remington 700, nothing fancy, but it had seen me through more than a few tight spots. As I loaded it, I couldn't help but think about my dad. He taught me how to shoot when I was just a kid, one of the few useful things he passed down before he walked out on us. Always respect the gun, he'd say, but never fear it. It's just a tool, like any other. I wondered what he'd think of me now, about to track some unknown beast through the wilderness. With the rifle slung over my shoulder and a handful of extra rounds in my pocket, I stepped back outside. The silence seemed even more oppressive now, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I took one last look at my cabin, wondering if I'd see it again, then set off following the blood trail. The further I went into the woods, the darker it got. The trees here were old, their branches twisting together overhead to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air grew colder, damper, and that feeling of being watched intensified. I'd been walking for about a mile when the blood trail suddenly stopped. It was like whatever had been bleeding just disappeared into thin air, leaving nothing but the thick trees and underbrush around me. I scanned the area, looking for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. No birds, no rustling leaves, just that damn silence again. I was about to turn back when I heard it. Not a growl. Not some low, menacing sound like in the movies. No, it was more like breathing. Heavy, raspy breathing, like whatever it was had been running. And now it was watching me. I turned, rifle raised, my heart thudding so loud I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. That's when I saw it, and my world changed forever. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but there it was, crouched low between the trees. The thing was massive, standing on two legs, but hunched forward like it was used to being on all fours. Its fur was matted, dark and thick like a wolf's, but its limbs were too long, almost human-like, except for the claws that curled at the ends. And its face? Well, let's just say it was somewhere between a wolf and something I can't quite describe, something more predatory. Its eyes were what got me, yellow, intelligent, and filled with a hunger that made my blood run cold. For a split second, we just stared at each other. I thought maybe I could scare it off, so I fired a shot into the ground between us. It didn't even flinch. The creature just stood there staring with this awful intent, like it was deciding whether or not I was worth the effort. Then, just as quick as it had appeared, it darted off into the woods, moving faster than anything that size had any right to. I don't know what possessed me to chase after it, but I did. I wasn't thinking straight, adrenaline pumping through me. I wasn't going to let this thing get away, not when it had been that close to my home. I followed the sound of its movement, crashing through the trees like a freight train, but every time I thought I was getting close, it would disappear again, leaving only the sound of that breathing somewhere off in the distance. By the time I realized how far I'd gone, it was already too late. The sun was beginning to set, and I had no idea where I was. The forest was dense here, darker than I'd ever seen it, and that uneasy feeling from earlier came back, stronger than ever. I stood still for a moment, catching my breath, trying to get my bearings, but all I could hear was the silence closing in around me. And then, cutting through that silence like a knife, I heard the scream. The scream tore through the air, shattering the eerie silence of the forest. It wasn't an animal sound. It was human, a man's voice, coming from somewhere up ahead. Without thinking, I ran toward it, crashing through the underbrush, rifle ready. The dense foliage gave way to a small clearing, and that's when I found him. Or what was left of him. The man was lying in the middle of the clearing, his torso torn open like some animal had gutted him. Blood soaked the ground around him, pooling in the dirt and leaves. His face was twisted in a mix of terror and pain, eyes wide and staring at nothing, mouth frozen in a silent scream. His arms were reaching out as if he'd been trying to crawl away from whatever had attacked him. I didn't recognize him, but judging by his clothes, expensive hiking gear that looked barely used, he wasn't a local. Probably some poor hiker who had wandered too far off the trail, ending up in the wrong place at the wrong time. I kneeled down beside him, my mind racing. This wasn't the work of any normal predator. It was too brutal, too deliberate. The man's chest had been ripped open with surgical precision. His ribs cracked outward like some grotesque flower. Internal organs were missing, and the edges of the wound were ragged, as if whatever had done this had used claws instead of teeth. The smell of blood and viscera was overwhelming, and I had to fight the urge to vomit. I'd seen dead animals before, had even cleaned and dressed my own kills, but this was something else entirely. This was murder, pure and simple. And then I heard it again, the breathing, closer this time, heavy and wet, like whatever was making the sound had just finished a meal. I spun around and there it was, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me with that same predatory calm. The creature was even bigger up close, easily 7 feet tall when standing upright. Its fur was matted with blood, fresh blood, and chunks of something I didn't want to think about. But it was the eyes that held me, yellow and intelligent, filled with a hunger that went beyond mere animal instinct. This wasn't some wild beast acting on impulse. This was something else, something that killed for more than just food or territory. It had killed this man like it was nothing, and now it was looking at me like I was next on the menu. I raised my rifle, but before I could get a shot off, it charged. The thing moved so fast it was on me in seconds, knocking the rifle out of my hands and sending me crashing to the ground. Its claws raked across my chest, tearing through my jacket like paper, and I felt the burn of the cuts as I scrambled to get away. The creature's breath was hot on my face, reeking of rotten meat and something else, something almost chemical. Its jaws snapped inches from my throat, and I could see bits of flesh stuck between its teeth. In that moment I was sure I was going to die, torn apart like the hiker, just another victim in these godforsaken woods. But somehow, whether by luck or sheer desperation, I managed to roll out from under it, grabbing the rifle as I did. I fired, the sound of the shot deafening in the small clearing. This time I hit it. The bullet caught the creature in the shoulder and it staggered back, snarling and clutching at the wound. For a moment we just stared at each other, me on the ground, gasping for air, rifle trained on its chest. The creature standing there, yellow eyes narrowed in what looked almost like surprise, like it hadn't expected me to fight back. Then without warning it turned and disappeared into the trees, moving with that unnatural speed. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I took off running, crashing through the forest, the sound of my own blood pounding in my ears. I didn't look back, not until I reached the cabin. By the time I slammed the door behind me, I was gasping for air, my chest burning from both the cuts and the exertion. I locked the door, grabbed every piece of ammo I had left, and sat there, staring at the entrance, waiting for it to come crashing through at any moment. But it didn't. The thing didn't follow me, not right away anyway. For hours I sat there waiting. I could hear the wind outside, the trees swaying, but nothing else. No breathing, no movement. Just that damned silence again. As the adrenaline wore off, the pain from my injuries set in. I peeled off my shredded jacket and shirt, wincing as the fabric stuck to the cuts. There were 4 long gashes across my chest, not deep enough to need stitches, but bad enough to leave scars. I cleaned them as best I could with whiskey and bandaged them up, all the while keeping one eye on the door. I don't know how long I sat there, rifle in hand, jumping at every little sound. At some point exhaustion took over, and I must have dozed off. When I woke up, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a pale light through the windows. For a moment I thought maybe it was all over. that the creature had moved on, that I could chalk it all up to some bizarre trauma-induced hallucination. But then I saw it, and my blood ran cold. Lying on my front porch, not more than a few feet from the door, was another body. This one was smaller, a woman. Her throat had been torn open, and her eyes, well, let's just say whatever was in them wasn't fear. It was worse than that. Almost like she'd been waiting for it. Like she knew what was coming and accepted it. I've never been one to panic, but right then, I felt something close to it creeping up inside me. I didn't know who she was, how she'd ended up here, or why that thing had killed her and left her on my doorstep like some twisted offering. But one thing was clear. It wasn't done with me yet. I stood there staring at the body on my porch, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The woman looked to be in her mid-30s with long dark hair matted with blood. She was dressed for hiking, much like the man I'd found in the clearing, but her gear was more worn, like she knew what she was doing out here. What struck me most, though, was the expression on her face. Despite the violence of her death, there was an eerie calm in her features. Her eyes, though glazed over in death, seemed to be looking at something beyond this world. It was unsettling, to say the least. I knew I should call the police, report what had happened, but something held me back. Maybe it was the fear of not being believed, of being labeled as some crazy mountain man, or maybe it was the growing suspicion that whatever was happening out here went beyond normal law enforcement. Either way, I couldn't stay here. Not with that thing still out there, not with 2 bodies piling up. I packed up whatever I could carry, some clothes, food, my rifle, and all the ammo I had left. As I was shoving things into my old army duffel, my hand brushed against something cold and metal at the bottom of a drawer. It was my old service pistol, a reminder of a life I'd left behind years ago. I hesitated for a moment, then added it to my bag. Something told me I'd need all the firepower I could get. With one last look at my cabin, the place that had been my sanctuary for the past 3 years, I set off towards town. The body of the woman still lay on the porch. I couldn't bring myself to move her. Let whoever came looking for her find her there. Maybe then they'd start to understand what was really going on in these woods. The walk to town was long and nerve-wracking. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had me spinning around, rifle at the ready. But nothing came. No sign of the creature, no more bodies, just the oppressive silence of the forest. By the time I reached the outskirts of town, the sun was high in the sky. Pinewood wasn't much of a place, just a main street with a handful of shops, a diner, and the sheriff's office. As I walked down the street, I could feel eyes on me. It wasn't often they saw someone come stumbling out of the woods looking like they'd been through hell. I made my way straight to the sheriff's office. The bell over the door jingled as I entered, and I found myself face to face with Sheriff Hank Rollins. I'd met him a few times before, usually when I came into town for supplies. He was a big man with a bushy mustache and eyes that had seen too much. "Travis," he said, looking me up and down, "you look like you've been through the ringer. What brings you down from your mountain?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. The tracks, the blood trail, the creature I'd seen, the man in the clearing, and the woman on my porch. As I spoke, I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of disbelief or concern. But Rollins just listened, his expression never changing. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed, rubbed his face with one big hand, and said, "We'll take care of it." I blinked, not sure I'd heard him right. "Take care of it? Did you hear what I said? There's something out there, something killing people." Rollins held up a hand. "I heard you, Travis, and I said we'll take care of it. Now why don't you head over to the motel and get some rest? You look like you could use it." There was something in his tone, a finality that brooked no argument, but I couldn't let it go, not yet. "What do you mean, take care of it?" I pressed, leaning forward on his desk. "There are 2 bodies out there, Sheriff, 2 people torn apart by something that shouldn't exist, and you're acting like this is just another day at the office." Rollins leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving mine. "Travis, how long have you been living up in those woods?" 3 years, I said, not sure where he was going with this. He nodded slowly. And in those 3 years, have you ever wondered why we don't get many tourists around here? Why the hiking trails suddenly end miles before they reach your neck of the woods? A chill ran down my spine. What are you saying? I'm saying that what you saw, it's not the first time something like this has happened, and it won't be the last. He stood up, walking over to a filing cabinet in the corner of the office. We've been dealing with incidents like this for generations. He pulled out a thick file, dropping it on the desk between us. I opened it, my hands shaking slightly. Inside were dozens of reports dating back decades. Missing hikers, mutilated livestock, strange sightings in the woods, all of them eerily similar to what I'd experienced. Why haven't you done anything about it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rollins laughed, but there was no humor in it. Done anything? What exactly do you suggest we do, Travis? Call in the National Guard, the FBI, and tell them what? That we've got a monster in our woods? He shook his head. No, we learned a long time ago that the best thing to do is keep it contained. Keep people away from that part of the forest. And when something does happen, we clean it up quietly. I stared at him, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. So you just let it keep killing? How many people have died because of your containment? Fewer than would die if we let the truth get out, Rollins said firmly. Can you imagine the panic? The flood of thrill seekers and monster hunters? We'd have a bloodbath on our hands. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. This isn't right. People need to know what's out there. Rollins' hand moved to his holster, not drawing his weapon, but making it clear he could if he needed to. I'm sorry, Travis, but I can't let you do that. For the good of this town, for the safety of everyone here, this needs to stay quiet. We stood there, locked in a tense standoff. Part of me wanted to grab my rifle to force him to listen. But I knew that would only end one way. Finally, I spoke. What happens now? Now, Rollins said, relaxing slightly. You go to the motel and get some rest. Tomorrow you leave town. Go somewhere far away from here, start a new life, and you forget everything you saw in those woods. And if I don't, I challenged. His eyes hardened. Then I'll have to assume you're a danger to this community, and I'll deal with you accordingly. The threat hung in the air between us. I realized then that I had two choices: leave and try to forget, or stay and fight a battle I couldn't win. Not here, not against an entire town determined to keep its secrets. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the office. The bell jingled again as the door closed behind me, sounding almost mocking in its cheerfulness. I made my way to the Pine Grove Motel at the edge of town. The place was a relic from the 50s, all faded paint and neon signs. The clerk barely looked up as he handed me a key, and I trudged to my room. Once inside, I collapsed on the bed, the events of the past 24 hours crashing down on me. My chest ached where the creature had clawed me, a constant reminder that it hadn't all been some twisted nightmare. As I lay there staring at the water-stained ceiling, I tried to make sense of it all. The creature in the woods, the bodies, the sheriff's cold acceptance of it all. It felt like I'd stumbled into some kind of horror movie, except there was no one coming to wake me up, no credits about to roll. This was my reality now, a reality where monsters existed, where entire communities conspired to keep them secret, where the law turned a blind eye to murder for the sake of containment. I must have dozed off at some point, because I woke with a start, the room dark around me. For a moment I didn't know where I was. Then it all came flooding back and I sat up, my heart pounding. Something had woken me, a sound. I held my breath, listening. There it was again, a soft scratch at the door, like claws on wood. I reached for my rifle, moving as quietly as I could. The scratching came again, more insistent this time. I aimed at the door, my finger on the trigger, waiting. The door handle turned slowly, and I tensed, ready to fire. But when the door opened, it wasn't the creature standing there. It was a woman, her eyes wide with fear. "Please," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "You have to help me. It's coming." I lowered my rifle, but didn't put it down completely. After everything I'd seen, I wasn't taking any chances. "Who are you?" I demanded. "What's coming?" The woman slipped into the room, closing the door quietly behind her. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with short blonde hair and haunted eyes. "My name's Laura," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And if you've been in those woods, you know what's coming." A chill ran down my spine. "The creature," I said. It wasn't a question. Laura nodded, wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold. "I've been tracking it for months, ever since it—" She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. "Since it what?" I pressed, though I had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. "Since it killed my brother," she finished, her voice breaking. "He was a forest ranger. They told us it was a bear attack, but I knew it was something else." I gestured for her to sit on the bed while I peeked out the window. The parking lot was empty, no sign of movement. But that didn't mean much. I'd seen how fast that thing could move. "How did you find me?" I asked, turning back to Laura. "I overheard the sheriff talking to one of his deputies," she explained. "They mentioned a guy coming down from the mountains talking about some kind of monster. I knew you'd seen it too." I nodded slowly, piecing it together. "And you thought I could help you? Can you?" The hope in her voice was almost painful to hear. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know. I'm not even sure what we're dealing with here, and the whole town seems to be in on some kind of cover-up." Laura's eyes hardened. "I know. I've been trying to get answers for months, but everyone just stonewalls me. They think if they ignore it, it'll go away." "But it won't," I finished for her. "It's only getting bolder." She nodded grimly. "The attacks are getting more frequent and closer to town. It's only a matter of time before—" A howl cut through the night, so close it made the windows rattle. Laura jumped, her face going pale. "It's here," she whispered. I grabbed my rifle and duffel bag, shoving extra ammo into my pockets. "We need to move, now." "Where?" Laura asked, already on her feet. "Away from here," I said, leading her to the door. "If that thing's in town, people are going to die." We slipped out of the motel room, keeping low and moving fast. The parking lot was still empty, but I could hear commotion from the direction of Main Street. Shouting, car alarms, another of those bone-chilling howls. "This way," I whispered, heading for the tree line behind the motel. It felt wrong going back into the woods where this all started, but it was our best chance of not being seen. We'd barely made it past the first row of trees when I heard it. That heavy, raspy breathing. I spun around, rifle raised, and there it was. The creature stood at the edge of the parking lot, its massive form silhouetted against the motel's neon sign. Its head swiveled in our direction, those yellow eyes gleaming in the darkness. For a moment we were frozen, neither side moving. Then it charged. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Laura's arm and pulling her deeper into the woods. We crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. Behind us I could hear the creature gaining ground, its powerful strides eating up the distance between us. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I kept pushing forward. Laura stumbled, and I hauled her back to her feet, practically dragging her along. "Come on," I gasped. "We can't stop." We burst into a small clearing, and I skidded to a halt. Ahead of us, the ground dropped away into a steep ravine. The sound of rushing water echoed up from below, a river swollen with spring runoff. "What do we do?" Laura panted, her eyes wide with terror. The creature's breathing was getting closer. We had seconds, maybe less. I looked at the ravine, then back at Laura. "Do you trust me?" She nodded without hesitation. "Then jump." I grabbed her hand, and together we leapt off the edge of the ravine. For a heart-stopping moment, we were in free fall. Then we hit the water with a shock that drove the air from my lungs. The current caught us immediately, sweeping us downstream. I struggled to keep my head above water, still clutching Laura's hand. Behind us I heard a roar of frustration, the creature unwilling or unable to follow us into the river. We were carried downstream for what felt like miles, the freezing water numbing my body. Finally, the current slowed enough for us to make our way to the bank. We dragged ourselves out of the water, collapsing on the rocky shore, gasping for air. For a long moment, we just lay there, too exhausted to move. Then Laura started laughing, a high, slightly hysterical sound. "We made it," she gasped between giggles. "We actually made it." I couldn't help but join in, the laughter a release of all the fear and tension we'd been holding on to. But as our laughter died down, reality set back in. We were alive, yes, but we were also miles from town, soaking wet, with a monster still out there hunting us. "What now?" Laura asked, voicing the question that was running through my mind. I sat up, wincing at the various aches and pains making themselves known. Now we find somewhere safe to hole up and figure out our next move. This isn't over, not by a long shot. As we gathered ourselves to move on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not by the creature, we'd left that behind, at least for now. No, this was something else. Something that had been out here in these woods all along, waiting. And I had a sinking feeling that our leap into the river had just taken us from the frying pan into the fire. We trudged through the woods for what felt like hours, our clothes still damp and clinging uncomfortably to our skin. The adrenaline from our escape had long since worn off, leaving us exhausted and on edge. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves had us freezing in place, expecting the creature to come bursting out of the darkness, but it never came. Instead, we were left with an eerie silence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. It was the kind of quiet that made you want to start talking, just to fill the void. But we kept our voices low, afraid of what might be listening. "So," Laura whispered as we picked our way through a particularly dense patch of underbrush, "what exactly did you see up in those mountains?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell her. But after what we'd been through, she deserved the truth. So I told her everything: the tracks, the blood trail, my encounter with the creature, and the bodies I'd found. Laura listened silently, her face pale in the moonlight filtering through the trees. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "It matches what I've pieced together," she finally said. "The attacks, the cover-ups. But seeing it up close like that," she shuddered, "I can't imagine." "What about you?" I asked. "You said you've been tracking it. What have you found out?" She sighed, pushing a wet strand of hair out of her face. "Not as much as I'd hoped. The locals are tight-lipped and the official reports are all sanitized. But I did manage to dig up some old newspaper articles, stories that were buried or dismissed as folklore." "What kind of stories?" "Sightings going back decades," she explained, "maybe even centuries. The Native Americans in this area had legends about a creature they called the Shadow Walker, a beast that walked like a man but hunted like a wolf." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. "And you think that's what we're dealing with?" Laura shrugged. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's been here a long time, and the people in charge seem more interested in covering it up than stopping it." We lapsed into silence again, each lost in our own thoughts. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded. The forest seemed to be guiding us, subtle shifts in the terrain nudging us in a specific direction. But towards what, I couldn't say. Just as I was about to suggest we stop and rest, Laura grabbed my arm. "Look," she whispered, pointing ahead. Through the trees I could see a faint glow. As we got closer, I realized it was coming from a cabin, old and run down, but definitely man-made. "Should we check it out?" Laura asked, a note of hope in her voice. I hesitated. On one hand, the cabin could offer shelter and maybe some supplies. On the other, my experience with cabins in these woods hadn't exactly been positive lately. In the end, our need for rest and a chance to dry off won out. We approached cautiously, me with my rifle at the ready, Laura clutching a heavy branch she'd picked up along the way. The cabin looked like it had been abandoned for years. The windows were boarded up and vines crept up the walls. But as we got closer, I noticed something odd. There were no cobwebs around the door, no buildup of leaves or debris. Someone had been here recently. I tried the door, half expecting it to be locked. To my surprise, it swung open with barely a creak. Inside, it was pitch black. I fumbled in my damp pockets for my lighter, finally managing to flick it on. The small flame illuminated a scene that made my blood run cold. The interior of the cabin was a single room, and every inch of wall space was covered in papers, photos, and maps. Red string connected various points, creating a web of information that sprawled across the entire cabin. But it was what was on those papers that really got to me. Detailed sketches of creatures that looked disturbingly like what we'd seen in the woods. Newspaper clippings about missing hikers and unexplained animal attacks. And photos, dozens of them, showing mangled bodies and strange tracks in the mud. "What is this place?" Laura breathed, her eyes wide as she took it all in. I moved deeper into the cabin, my lighter casting dancing shadows on the walls. "I think we've stumbled into someone else's investigation," I said, examining a map that seemed to show the locations of various attacks. As I studied the map, something caught my eye. There was a spot marked with a red X deep in the mountains. Scrawled next to it were the words source, origin point. "Laura," I called, "come look at this." She made her way over, careful not to disturb anything. "What is it?" I pointed to the X. "I think whoever was staying here might have found where this thing came from." Laura leaned in for a closer look, her brow furrowed. "But that area, it's practically inaccessible, miles from any trails or roads." "Maybe that's the point," I mused. "If you wanted to hide something, that'd be the place to do it." We continued exploring the cabin, piecing together bits of information. Whoever had been staying here had been thorough in their research. There were notes on local history, geological surveys, even weather patterns over the past few decades. But the more we uncovered, the more questions we had. Who had put all this together? And more importantly, where were they now? As if in answer to my unspoken question, Laura called out from the other side of the cabin. Travis, you need to see this," Laura called out, her voice tight with tension. I made my way over to where she was standing, holding up a piece of paper she'd found tacked to the wall behind a stack of books. It was a handwritten note, the ink still fresh enough that it smudged slightly under Laura's trembling fingers. "If you're reading this, they've already found me," the note began, "but that doesn't matter now. What matters is that you know the truth. The creature isn't just some animal. It's the result of something much worse, something man-made." I felt a chill run down my spine as I read those words. Laura continued reading aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a facility deep in the mountains. Officially it doesn't exist, but I found evidence. Shipping manifests, redacted government reports, whispers from people who used to work there. They were experimenting with genetic engineering, trying to create the perfect soldier. But something went wrong, or maybe something went too right." The note went on to describe coordinates deep in the most remote part of the forest. It matched the location of the red X on the map we'd found earlier. "Whoever finds this," the note concluded, "you have to finish what I started. Expose the truth. Stop them before it's too late. And whatever you do, don't trust." The note ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted mid-sentence. A smear of what looked disturbingly like dried blood stained the bottom corner of the paper. Laura and I looked at each other, the implications of what we'd just read sinking in. This wasn't just about a monster in the woods anymore. This was about a cover-up that went far beyond a small-town sheriff trying to keep things quiet. "We need to go to those coordinates," Laura said, her jaw set with determination. I nodded slowly, my mind racing. "But we can't just walk in there blind. We need supplies, weapons, a plan." As if on cue, a floorboard creaked behind us. We spun around, my rifle coming up instinctively. Standing in the doorway was a man I didn't recognize. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. In his hands was a shotgun, pointed squarely at us. "Well," he said, his voice gravelly and tired, "looks like you two have stumbled into something you shouldn't have." I kept my rifle trained on him, my finger hovering near the trigger. "Who are you?" I demanded. The old man's mouth twisted into a humorless smile. "Name's Frank. I'm the one who wrote that note you're holding. And if you're smart, you'll put down that gun and listen to what I have to say. Because believe me, kids, you're going to need all the help you can get." For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension in the small cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Then slowly I lowered my rifle. Laura shot me a questioning look, but I gave a small nod. Something in Frank's eyes told me he wasn't our enemy, at least not right now. Frank lowered his shotgun as well, though he kept it close. "All right," he said, moving further into the cabin and closing the door behind him. "Let's talk." Over the next hour, Frank filled in the gaps of the story we'd been piecing together. He was a former military scientist who had been part of the initial experiments at the secret facility. But when he realized the true nature of what they were creating, he tried to shut it down. "They said it was for national security," Frank explained, his voice bitter. "A way to create soldiers who could adapt to any environment, heal from almost any wound. But they didn't stop to think about the consequences, about what would happen if their perfect soldier decided it didn't want to follow orders." "The creature," Laura said softly, "it escaped?" Frank nodded grimly. "About 10 years ago, they tried to contain it, to cover it up, but they underestimated its intelligence. its ability to adapt and evolve. And now, he trailed off, staring at the wall of information he'd collected. Now it's out there, killing, I finished for him. And breeding, Frank added, causing both Laura and me to stare at him in shock. That's right. The attacks have been increasing because there's more than one now, a whole pack of them hidden somewhere in these mountains. The implications of that were staggering. One of these creatures had been bad enough, but a whole pack? The entire region could be at risk. So what's the plan? I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. How do we stop them? Frank's eyes hardened with resolve. We go to the source, the facility where it all started. They have to have some way to control these things, some failsafe they built in. If we can get in there, maybe we can find a way to end this once and for all. It was a long shot, and we all knew it, but it was the only plan we had. As we began to prepare for what would undoubtedly be a dangerous journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping into something much bigger than we realized. The creature in the woods was just the tip of the iceberg. What other secrets were hidden in the depths of these mountains? And more importantly, would we survive long enough to uncover them? The next few days were a blur of preparation and planning. Frank's cabin, once a monument to his solitary investigation, became our base of operations. We pored over maps, studied Frank's notes, and gathered what supplies we could. Frank had an impressive arsenal hidden away, military-grade weapons that he'd acquired over the years. We each took what we could carry. I stuck with my trusty rifle but added a sidearm and some extra ammo. Laura chose a compact submachine gun that she seemed surprisingly comfortable handling. Frank, of course, kept his shotgun close. These might slow them down, Frank explained as he handed out several strange-looking grenades. But don't count on them stopping the creatures for good. They're designed to disorient, mess with their enhanced senses. Use them as a last resort. As we prepared, Frank filled us in on more details about the facility and the experiments that had led to the creation of the creatures. The more I heard, the more horrified I became. They had combined human and animal DNA, pushing the boundaries of science and ethics in ways that made my stomach turn. The goal was to create the perfect adaptive predator, Frank explained, his voice heavy with regret. Something that could think like a human but hunt like an animal. They succeeded beyond their wildest dreams and their worst nightmares. On the third day, we set out at dawn. The coordinates Frank had identified were deep in the most remote part of the mountains, a good 2-day hike from the cabin. We moved as quietly as we could, always on alert for any sign of the creatures. As we hiked, I found myself walking beside Laura. Despite the grim circumstances, I found her presence oddly comforting. There was a strength in her that went beyond physical capability, a determination born from personal loss and a desire for justice. Your brother, I said quietly as we picked our way through a particularly dense section of forest. What was his name? Laura was silent for a moment, and I worried I'd overstepped. But then she answered, her voice soft but steady. Michael. His name was Michael. He loved these woods more than anything. Said they were the last truly wild place left. I nodded, understanding all too well the appeal of the wilderness. He sounds like he was a good man. The best, Laura agreed, a sad smile playing at her lips. He's the reason I can't just walk away from this. He would have wanted the truth to come out, no matter what. As we continued on, the terrain became increasingly difficult. The trees grew denser, the underbrush thicker. It was as if the forest itself was trying to keep us out, to protect the secrets hidden in its depths. By nightfall, we were all exhausted. We made camp in a small clearing, taking turns keeping watch. As I sat there in the darkness, rifle across my lap, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest was too quiet, the shadows too deep. It was on the second day of our journey that things went sideways. We were picking our way along a narrow ridge when Frank, who was leading the way, suddenly held up a hand for us to stop. He crouched down, examining something on the ground that I couldn't see from where I stood. Tracks, he said grimly. Fresh ones, and heading in the same direction we are. Laura and I exchanged worried glances. You think they know where we're going? She asked. Frank stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the trees around us. I think they've always known. We're not hunting them. They're hunting us. No sooner had the words left his mouth than we heard it, that now familiar sound of heavy, raspy breathing. But this time it wasn't coming from just one direction. It was all around us. "Run!" Frank yelled, already moving. We took off down the ridge, abandoning any pretense of stealth. Behind us, I could hear the creatures crashing through the underbrush, gaining ground with every second. My lungs burned as we ran, the weight of my pack and weapons feeling heavier with each step. Ahead of me, I saw Laura stumble on a loose rock. Without thinking, I reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her along with me. We burst out of the tree line onto a rocky outcropping. Below us, a steep cliff dropped away into a misty valley. We were trapped. Frank spun around, his shotgun raised. "Get behind me," he shouted. Laura and I took up positions on either side of him, forming a tight triangle with our backs to the cliff edge. For a moment all was silent except for our ragged breathing. Then they emerged from the trees, 3 of them, moving with that unnatural grace that still sent chills down my spine. They were even more terrifying in the daylight, their fur matted and scarred, yellow eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence. "Don't fire unless they charge," Frank muttered. "Maybe we can—" His words were cut off as one of the creatures let out a bone-chilling howl and leaped towards us. Frank's shotgun boomed, the sound echoing off the cliff walls. The creature staggered but didn't fall. All hell broke loose. I fired my rifle, aiming for center mass like I'd been trained. Beside me, Laura's submachine gun chattered, sending a spray of bullets into the oncoming monsters. But they were fast, too fast. One of them got past our line of fire, its claws raking across Frank's chest. The old man went down with a cry of pain. "Frank!" Laura screamed, turning to help him. In that moment of distraction, another creature lunged at her. I threw myself in its path, feeling a searing pain as its claws tore into my shoulder. The force of its charge sent us both tumbling over the edge of the cliff. As we fell, time seemed to slow down. I saw Laura's horrified face at the edge of the cliff, heard her scream my name. Then there was nothing but the rush of air and the sickening knowledge that the ground was coming up fast. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the feeling of something grabbing me, slowing my fall. Then darkness claimed me, and I knew no more. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I finally came to, it was to a world of pain and darkness. Every part of my body ached, and my shoulder felt like it was on fire where the creature's claws had torn into me. Slowly, carefully, I opened my eyes. I was lying on my back, staring up at a rocky ceiling. The air around me was damp and cool, with a musty smell that suggested I was underground. A cave, maybe? As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I tried to piece together what had happened. The fight on the cliff, falling, and then something had grabbed me. But what? And where was I now? I attempted to sit up, only to have a wave of dizziness wash over me. That's when I heard it. Movement in the darkness. Something was in here with me. My hand instinctively went for my rifle, only to find it gone. Of course, I must have lost it in the fall. I was defenseless, injured, and trapped in the dark with God knows what. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice hoarse and weak. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then from the shadows, a voice spoke. It was low and gravelly, with an accent I couldn't quite place. "You should not have come here, human. This place is not for your kind." I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out the speaker. "Who are you? What is this place?" A figure stepped into what little light there was, and I had to stifle a gasp. It was one of them, one of the creatures, but this one was different. Older, if that was possible for these things. Its fur was streaked with gray, and its yellow eyes held a wisdom that the others had lacked. "I am what your kind would call an elder," it said, studying me with those unnerving eyes. "And this is our sanctuary." I tried to process what I was hearing. The creature could speak. It was intelligent, far more so than we had realized. And sanctuary? What did that mean? "Why did you save me?" I asked, because I was certain now that it had been this creature that had broken my fall. The elder tilted its head, considering me. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe hope. Hope that not all humans are like those who created us. Over the next few hours, as I drifted in and out of consciousness, the elder told me their story. How they had been created in a lab, subjected to countless experiments and modifications. How they had eventually escaped, fleeing into the wilderness to carve out a life for themselves. But some of us, the elder explained, could not leave behind the rage, the hunger that was bred into us. They hunt, they kill, unable to control the instincts your scientists gave us. I thought of the bodies we'd found, of the terror we'd experienced in the woods. And the others, the ones who attacked us? The elder's eyes darkened. They are lost to us. They have embraced the monster your kind tried to create. We try to contain them, to protect both your people and ours, but it trailed off, and I could see the weight of responsibility in its posture. These creatures, these people, were victims as much as anyone else. Victims of human arrogance and the uncontrolled pursuit of power. As my strength slowly returned, the elder told me more about their society, hidden away in a network of caves deep in the mountains. They had built a life here, away from the humans who had created and then abandoned them. But now, with the attacks increasing and humans like me starting to uncover the truth, their sanctuary was threatened. "Your friends," I said suddenly, remembering Laura and Frank. "Are they?" The elder shook its head. "We do not know. The others were pursuing them last we saw. If they are clever and strong, they may have survived. If not..." I closed my eyes, fighting back a wave of despair. Laura and Frank could be dead, torn apart by the very creatures we'd been trying to stop. And for what? What had any of this accomplished? As if reading my thoughts, the elder spoke again. "You came seeking answers, did you not? Perhaps even a way to end this?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Then listen carefully, human, for I will tell you what you need to know. But be warned, the truth may be more than you are prepared to bear." And so there in that dark cave, miles beneath the mountain and far from the world I knew, I listened as the elder revealed the full, terrible truth about the creatures, the experiments that had created them, and the dark legacy that threatened to consume us all. As I listened, I realized that our journey was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning, and the choices we would have to make in the days to come would determine not just our fate, but the fate of two species teetering on the brink of destruction. The true horror, I was beginning to understand, wasn't the monsters in the woods. It was the monsters who had created them, and the monsters we might become in trying to stop them. As the elder finished its tale, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything I'd learned. The full scope of the experiment, the government cover-up, the fracturing of the creatures into different factions. It was almost too much to comprehend. "So what now?" I finally asked, my voice hoarse. "How do we stop this?" The elder's eyes seemed to glow in the dim light of the cave. "There is a failsafe," it said slowly. "A genetic trigger built into our very DNA. If activated, it would end us, all of us." I felt a chill run down my spine. "You mean kill you?" The elder nodded solemnly. "It was the scientists' last resort, a way to eliminate their creations if we ever got out of control. The activation sequence is hidden in the facility where we were born." The implications were staggering. We had the means to stop the attacks, to end the threat once and for all. But at what cost? The extinction of an entire species, one that never asked to be created in the first place. Before I could respond, a commotion echoed through the cave system. Moments later, another creature appeared at the entrance to our chamber. It spoke rapidly to the elder in a language I couldn't understand, but the urgency was clear. The elder turned to me, its expression grave. "Your friends live. They have reached the facility, but they are not alone. The violent ones pursue them, and there are humans there as well. Armed humans." My heart raced. Laura and Frank were alive, but in danger. And who were these armed humans? Government agents come to clean up their mess? "I have to help them," I said, struggling to my feet despite the pain. The elder studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I will show you a way into the facility, a path known only to us. But what you do when you get there, that choice is yours alone to make." The journey through the cave system was a blur of twisting passages and steep climbs. Despite my injuries, adrenaline and determination kept me going. Finally, we emerged into the fading daylight. Ahead of us loomed a nondescript concrete building, half hidden in the mountainside. "There," the elder said, pointing to a well-concealed entrance. "That will lead you to the heart of the facility. Choose wisely, human. The fate of many rests in your hands." With a final nod of understanding between us, I made my way to the entrance. Taking a deep breath, I slipped inside. The interior of the facility was a maze of sterile corridors and abandoned labs. Signs of a hasty evacuation were everywhere. Overturned chairs, scattered papers, doors left ajar. I moved as quietly as I could, straining my ears for any sound of Laura or Frank. As I rounded a corner, I heard gunfire echoing from somewhere deeper in the complex. Throwing caution to the wind, I ran towards the sound. I burst into a large laboratory to find a scene of chaos. Laura and Frank were pinned down behind some overturned tables, exchanging fire with a group of men in tactical gear. On the far side of the room, two of the violent creatures were circling, looking for an opening to attack. Without hesitation, I opened fire on the tactical team, catching them by surprise. In the confusion, I managed to make my way to Laura and Frank's position. "Travis!" Laura exclaimed, relief evident in her voice. "We thought you were dead." "Almost," I grinned, wincing as my injured shoulder protested. "What's the situation?" Frank, looking worse for wear but still alert, quickly filled me in. "We found the main control room. The fail-safe device is in there, but these government goons showed up. They want to weaponize the creatures, start the program over." A roar from across the room reminded us of the other threat. The creatures were getting bolder, inching closer despite the gunfire. "We need to get to that control room," I said. "I've got an idea." Quickly, I outlined what I'd learned from the elder. Laura and Frank listened with wide eyes, the full weight of the decision before us settling in. "If we activate the failsafe, all the creatures die," Laura said softly, "even the peaceful ones." I nodded grimly. "But if we don't, the attacks will continue, and if these government agents get their way, they'll create more." Frank's expression hardened. "We can't let that happen. Whatever it takes, this has to end here." With a plan hastily formed, we made our move. Frank provided covering fire while Laura and I made a break for the control room door. The creatures, sensing our intent, charged forward with terrifying speed. We barely made it through the door, slamming it shut behind us just as claws raked against the metal. Inside, banks of computers and blinking lights filled the room, and there in the center was a simple metal box with a keypad. "The failsafe," Laura breathed. As if on cue, the door began to buckle under the assault from outside. We had moments at best. "Travis," Laura said, turning to me with tears in her eyes. "Is this right? Are we doing the right thing?" I thought of the elder, of the peaceful creatures who had built a life for themselves in the caves. I thought of the bodies we'd found in the woods, of the terror these attacks had caused. There was no right answer, no clean solution. In the end, it came down to an impossible choice. With a heavy heart, I reached for the keypad. The next few minutes were a blur of alarms, shouts, and inhuman screams. We fled through the chaos of the facility, past fallen creatures and confused government agents. At some point, we emerged into the cool mountain air, smoke and the echoes of destruction following us. As we stood there watching the facility burn, the full weight of what we'd done settled over us. We had played judge, jury, and executioner for an entire species. The attacks would stop, the threat would be over. But at what cost? Months have passed since that day on the mountain. The official story is that an underground medical research facility suffered a catastrophic accident. The nearby towns have reported no more mysterious attacks or disappearances. Life, it seems, has returned to normal. But for those of us who know the truth, nothing will ever be normal again. Laura has thrown herself into environmental law, fighting to protect the wilderness and prevent anything like this from happening again. Frank, his conscience heavy with the role he played in creating the creatures, has disappeared off the grid. As for me, I find myself back in my cabin in the woods. But now, the silence that I once found comforting feels oppressive. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, reminds me of what was lost. Some nights when the moon is full and the wind whispers through the trees, I swear I can hear them. The creatures we condemned, the lives we ended. Their howls echo in my dreams, a reminder of the terrible power of human ambition and the impossible choices we sometimes have to make. And I wonder, as I stare out into the darkness of the forest, if we truly solved the problem or if we just became part of it. For in our attempt to destroy the monsters, did we not become monsters ourselves? The woods are quiet now, but in that quiet, I hear the weight of our actions, and I know that some silences are louder than any scream. This happened in 1994. I was 29 years old then, fresh out of graduate school and working my first real job as a junior copywriter at an advertising agency in San Francisco. Life was a whirlwind of deadlines, coffee-fueled brainstorming sessions, and navigating office politics. So when my old college roommate Vanessa suggested a camping trip to Mount Shasta, I initially brushed off the idea. "Come on, Hannah," she pleaded over the phone one evening in early October. "When's the last time you took a real break? This could be our last chance to get away before winter sets in." I sighed, glancing at the stack of briefs on my desk. She had a point. The constant grind was wearing me down, and a part of me longed for fresh air and open spaces. Plus, it had been ages since Vanessa and I had really caught up. "All right," I conceded, "but just for a long weekend, okay? And please tell me we're not sleeping in tents." Vanessa laughed. "No worries there. My uncle has an old RV we can borrow. It's not exactly luxury accommodations, but it beats sleeping on the ground." A week later, I found myself behind the wheel of said RV, a behemoth from the late 70s that creaked and groaned with every turn. Vanessa sat beside me, practically bouncing in her seat with excitement. In the back, our mutual friend Greg was fiddling with his camera equipment. "You know," Vanessa said as we wound our way up the mountain road, "the Native Americans believed Mount Shasta was sacred, a spiritual vortex." Greg snorted. "Yeah, and perfect for some truly epic photography. That's the only spiritual thing I'm interested in capturing." I suppressed a sigh. We'd barely started the trip, and already I could feel the tension building. Vanessa had always been drawn to the mystical, while Greg was a diehard skeptic. I usually found myself stuck in the middle, trying to keep the peace. As we climbed higher, the air grew crisp and carried the scent of pine. The jagged peaks of Mount Shasta loomed ahead, seeming to watch our approach. Despite my initial reluctance, I felt a spark of excitement. Maybe this trip was exactly what I needed to recharge. We arrived at Panther Meadow Campground in the late afternoon. The sun was already dipping behind the mountain, casting long shadows across the clearing. As I maneuvered the RV into a spot, Vanessa practically leapt out the door. "Oh my God, can you feel it?" she exclaimed, spreading her arms wide. "The energy here is incredible." Greg rolled his eyes as he unpacked his camera bag. "The only thing I'm feeling is sore from being crammed in that dinosaur all day." I stretched, my back popping in protest. "I have to agree with Greg on that one. Let's get set up before it gets dark." As we unloaded supplies and got the RV situated, Vanessa regaled us with tales of Mount Shasta's legends. "People have reported seeing all sorts of strange things up here," she said. "Glowing orbs, mysterious figures. Some think it's spirits, others say it's aliens. And don't even get me started on the rumors about secret underground tunnels." "Vanessa," I interrupted, "can we save the spooky stories for around the campfire? I'd rather not freak myself out before nightfall." She grinned. "Where's the fun in that?" Once we were settled, we gathered around a small fire pit. The temperature had dropped significantly, and we huddled close to the flames, wrapped in jackets. Above us, the stars were breathtaking, more numerous and brilliant than I'd ever seen in the city. But as beautiful as it was, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Maybe it was Vanessa's stories getting to me, or maybe it was simply being so far from civilization. Whatever the cause, the deeper the night grew, the more oppressive the surrounding forest felt. The trees seemed to lean in, the darkness between them thick and impenetrable. We were in the middle of roasting marshmallows when we heard it, a faint, rhythmic sound drifting on the wind. It almost sounded like chanting. Greg paused mid-sentence, his expression hardening. "What the hell is that?" Vanessa's face lit up with excitement. "Oh wow, do you think it could be—" "It's probably just the wind carrying sound from another campsite," I interjected, trying to keep my voice steady. "This place is pretty popular, right?" But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. We hadn't seen another soul since arriving at the campground. The sound faded after a few minutes, but the damage was done. The earlier light-hearted mood had evaporated, replaced by a tense silence. We finished our s'mores quickly and retreated to the relative safety of the RV. As I lay in my narrow bunk that night, I tried to rationalize what we'd heard. It was probably just the wind, or maybe some local kids playing a prank. But no matter how I tried to explain it away, a part of me remained on high alert. Just before drifting off to sleep, I could have sworn I heard the wind whisper my name. I woke early the next morning, groggy and disoriented. It took me a moment to remember where I was. The events of the previous night came rushing back, and I shivered despite the warmth of my sleeping bag. Vanessa and Greg were already outside when I emerged from the RV. The morning was crisp and clear, with no trace of the eerie atmosphere from the night before. I took a deep breath, feeling some of my anxiety dissipate in the bright sunlight. Greg was hunched over his camera, muttering under his breath. As I approached, I could see the frustration etched on his face. "Everything okay?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, it's not. This damn thing won't turn on. It was working fine yesterday and now it's completely dead." I frowned. "Did you charge the battery?" "Of course I did," he snapped. "I'm not an amateur. It's like something fried the electronics. Brand new camera, and it's acting like it's been through a war zone." Before I could respond, Vanessa called out from a few yards away. "Guys, check this out." We walked over to find her staring at a compass, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What's up?" I asked. She held up the compass. The needle was spinning wildly, never settling on a direction. "This is wild," she said. "I've never seen anything like it." I peered at the device. "Maybe the magnetic field is weird up here. We are on a mountain." Vanessa shot me a knowing look. "Or maybe it's the vortex." Greg groaned. "Not this again. There's got to be a logical explanation." "Well, Mr. Logic," Vanessa retorted, "how do you explain your camera suddenly dying?" I could see an argument brewing, so I quickly intervened. "Hey, why don't we grab some breakfast and then check out one of the trails? It's a beautiful day for a hike." They both agreed, though somewhat reluctantly. As we ate and prepared for our hike, I found myself hoping that some physical activity would help dispel the strange tension that had settled over our group. The trail we chose wound through dense forest, occasionally opening up to reveal stunning views of the surrounding landscape. Under normal circumstances, I would have been in awe of the natural beauty. But even in the bright daylight, something about the forest felt off. Every so often I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darting between trees, or a flash of something just beyond my field of vision. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. I tried to convince myself it was just tricks of the light, or small animals I wasn't quite quick enough to spot. We had been hiking for about an hour when Greg suddenly stopped in his tracks. "Okay, please tell me I'm not the only one seeing weird stuff," he said, his voice tight. Vanessa nodded eagerly. "You mean like shapes moving in the trees?" "Yeah, I've been noticing that since we started." I felt a chill run down my spine, so it wasn't just me. "That's classic Mount Shasta," Vanessa continued, her earlier excitement returning. "Shadows, whispers, strange figures. It's all part of the lore." Greg ran a hand through his hair. "Great, so we're all hallucinating now?" "We're probably just on edge from last night," I said, trying to sound reasonable. "Our minds are playing tricks on us." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. There was something undeniably strange about this place, something that seemed to defy logical explanation. We continued our hike, but the carefree mood from earlier was gone. We stuck closer together, our conversation muted. Every snapping twig or rustle of leaves made us jump. By the time we made it back to our campsite, dark clouds were rolling in and the wind had picked up considerably. As we huddled in the RV, listening to the howling wind outside, I voiced what we were all thinking. "Maybe we should head out tomorrow. This place is starting to give me the creeps." Greg looked up from his still-dead camera. "Normally I'd argue, but yeah, I think that might be for the best." Vanessa seemed torn. "But we've barely scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore." "Vanessa," I said gently, "I know you were looking forward to this trip, but something doesn't feel right here. I think we should trust our instincts." She sighed. "Yeah, I guess you're right. It's just, I've always wanted to experience the mysteries of Mount Shasta. And now that we're here, it feels like we're running away." I patted her arm sympathetically. I get it. But sometimes discretion is the better part of valor, you know. As night fell, the storm intensified. Rain lashed against the RV, and wind rocked us back and forth. We tried to keep our spirits up with card games and idle chatter, but an undercurrent of tension remained. I was about to suggest we turn in for the night, when a loud crack of thunder shook the RV. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. "Shit," Greg muttered. "Please tell me we have flashlights." I fumbled in the darkness, eventually locating a flashlight in one of the cupboards. Its weak beam did little to dispel the oppressive blackness that had engulfed us. "Okay, nobody panic," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's probably just a blown fuse or something. I'll go check it out." "You're not going out there alone," Vanessa insisted. "Fine, we'll all go," Greg said. "Safety in numbers, right?" We donned our rain jackets and stepped out into the storm. The wind immediately tried to knock us off our feet, and the rain was so heavy I could barely see 2 feet in front of me. We made our way to the RV's power hookup, shielding the flashlight as best we could. I was reaching for the panel when I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was tall, unnaturally so, with limbs that seemed too long and joints that bent at odd angles. But it was the eyes that made my blood run cold, glowing yellow orbs that pierced through the darkness and rain, fixed directly on us. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. I grabbed Vanessa and Greg, pointing frantically at the figure. They both went rigid beside me. "What the fuck is that?" Greg whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just watched us with those terrible, glowing eyes. "Get back in the RV," I managed to choke out. "Now!" We scrambled back inside, slamming the door behind us. Vanessa was shaking uncontrollably, and Greg's face had gone ashen. "Tell me I didn't just see what I think I saw," he said. I shook my head, unable to form words. We huddled together in the darkness, jumping at every crack of thunder, every gust of wind that rocked the RV. None of us slept that night. The storm had passed by morning, but the sense of dread that had settled over us remained. We emerged from the RV cautiously, half expecting to see the horrifying figure still standing at the tree line. But the campsite was empty, peaceful even, in the soft morning light. Vanessa was the first to break the silence. "So, are we going to talk about what happened last night?" Greg ran a hand over his face. He looked like he had aged years overnight. "I don't even know where to start. That thing, it wasn't human." "Maybe it was just a shadow," I suggested weakly. "The storm playing tricks on our eyes." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. What we had seen was real, and it was still out there somewhere. We went through the motions of making breakfast, but none of us had much of an appetite. The cheerful banter from our first morning seemed like a distant memory. "So what's the plan?" Greg asked, as we half-heartedly picked at our food. "Are we getting out of here or what?" I nodded. "Yeah, I think that's for the best. We'll pack up and head out as soon as we can." To my surprise, Vanessa didn't argue. She had been uncharacteristically quiet all morning, her usual enthusiasm replaced by a haunted look. We started breaking down camp, working quickly and efficiently. I was in the middle of stowing gear in the RV when I realized I hadn't seen Vanessa in a while. "Hey, Greg," I called out. "Have you seen Vanessa?" He looked up from where he was dismantling the fire pit. "Not for a bit. Maybe she's in the RV?" A quick check confirmed she wasn't there. A tendril of fear began to coil in my stomach. "Vanessa?" I called out louder this time. No response. Greg and I searched the immediate area, calling her name with increasing urgency, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. "This isn't happening," Greg muttered, running his hands through his hair. "People don't just disappear." But I knew with a sickening certainty that this was exactly what had happened. Vanessa was gone. We expanded our search, combing the surrounding forest. That's when we found it. Vanessa's backpack, abandoned near the edge of the trees. Beside it, gouged deep into the earth, were claw marks. They were huge, far too large to belong to any animal I knew. Greg's face went pale. "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh God, oh God." I felt like I was going to be sick. "She wouldn't just leave," I said, my voice shaking. "Not without telling us." "No," Greg agreed. "She wouldn't." We stood there staring at the claw marks. neither of us wanting to voice the terrifying implications of what we were seeing. Finally, Greg spoke. "We need to get help. We need to call the rangers or the police or someone." I nodded numbly. Yeah, you're right. Let's get back to the RV and use the radio." But when we tried to use the RV's emergency radio, we found only static. No matter how we adjusted it, we couldn't get a signal out. "This is insane," Greg said, slamming his fist against the dashboard. "How is nothing working?" I tried to think logically through the panic clouding my mind. "Okay, we need to get down the mountain, find a phone, get help." Greg nodded. "Right, let's go." I turned the key in the ignition, praying the old RV would start. The engine sputtered once, twice, and then nothing. No, I muttered, trying again. Still nothing. Greg let out a string of curses. "Are you kidding me? What the hell is going on?" I leaned my head against the steering wheel, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. I don't know what's happening." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our situation pressing down on us. Our friend was missing, we had no way to call for help, and we were stranded in a place that seemed to defy the laws of reality. "We can't just sit here," Greg said finally. "We need to find Vanessa." I looked at him, saw the determination in his eyes despite the fear. Greg was right. As terrified as we were, we couldn't abandon Vanessa, whatever had taken her, and I was becoming increasingly certain that something had taken her, was still out there, and so was she. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "We'll pack some supplies and head out on foot, but we stick together no matter what. Agreed?" Greg nodded grimly. "Agreed." We gathered what we could carry: flashlights, extra batteries, water, some energy bars, and a first aid kit. I also grabbed the largest knife from the RV's kitchenette. It wasn't much, but it made me feel a little less helpless. As we prepared to leave, I scribbled a quick note explaining the situation and left it in the RV, just in case someone came looking for us. It felt like a futile gesture, but I needed to do something, anything that felt normal and rational. We set out, following the direction where we'd found Vanessa's backpack. The forest seemed different now, more sinister. The trees loomed over us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Every shadow held the potential for danger. We called Vanessa's name as we walked, our voices echoing unnaturally in the stillness. There was no response, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or snap of a twig. Sounds that made us jump every time. After what felt like hours of fruitless searching, we stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center stood a circle of stones, each about waist high. They looked ancient, covered in moss and strange, faded carvings. "What is this place?" Greg whispered, his voice tight with tension. I shook my head. "I don't know, some kind of old monument, maybe." As we approached the stone circle, the air seemed to thicken. It became harder to breathe, and a high-pitched ringing filled my ears. Greg stumbled, putting a hand to his head. "Hannah," he said, his words slurring slightly. "Something's wrong. I feel weird." I reached out to steady him, but as soon as I touched his arm, a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between us. We both cried out in shock. And then we heard it, the chanting. It was the same sound we'd heard that first night, but louder now, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We need to get out of here," I said, grabbing Greg's arm and pulling him away from the stone circle. But as we turned to leave, we saw them, dozens of glowing yellow eyes, watching us from the darkness between the trees. My heart felt like it was going to burst from my chest. "Run!" I screamed, and we took off, crashing through the underbrush. I don't know how long we ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning as we fled through the forest, the sound of pursuit always just behind us. Branches whipped at our faces, roots threatened to trip us at every step, but we didn't dare slow down. Finally, gasping for breath, we burst out of the trees and found ourselves on the edge of a cliff. Below us stretched a vast expanse of forest, and in the distance, the twinkling lights of a town. "Look," Greg panted, pointing at the lights. "Civilization. We just need to find a way down." But before we could catch our breath or formulate a plan, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air. It was Vanessa's voice, filled with terror and pain, coming from somewhere in the forest behind us. Greg's eyes met mine, wide with fear and indecision. "Hannah," he said, his voice shaking. "What do we do?" In that moment, standing on the cliff's edge with Vanessa's scream still echoing in my ears, I felt the weight of an impossible choice crushing down on me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this nightmarish place as possible. But Vanessa was our friend. We couldn't abandon her. "We have to go back," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Greg nodded, his face a mask of grim determination. "Yeah, I was afraid you'd say that." We turned away from the tantalizing lights of the distant town and plunged back into the oppressive darkness of the forest. This time we moved more cautiously, straining our ears for any sound that might lead us to Vanessa. The chanting had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow even worse. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. We had been searching for what felt like hours when Greg suddenly grabbed my arm, pulling me to a stop. "Listen," he whispered. At first I heard nothing. Then faintly I caught it, a soft whimpering sound coming from somewhere ahead of us. "Vanessa?" I called out softly, not wanting to alert whatever else might be out there. The whimpering grew louder, more distinct. It was definitely Vanessa. We pushed forward, moving as quietly as we could while still maintaining speed. The sound led us to another clearing, smaller than the one with the stone circle. In the center, illuminated by a shaft of moonlight breaking through the canopy, was Vanessa. She was curled into a fetal position, her body shaking with sobs. As we approached, I could see angry red marks covering her arms and legs, as if she'd been clawed by something with massive talons. "Vanessa," I said gently, kneeling beside her. "It's Hannah. Greg's here too. We're going to get you out of here." She looked up at us, her eyes wide and unfocused. "No," she moaned. "No, you shouldn't be here. You need to run. They're coming back. They're always coming back." "Who's coming back?" Greg asked, scanning the tree line nervously. Vanessa shook her head violently. "Not who? What? They're not human. Oh God, the things I've seen." She broke down into fresh sobs. I helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. "It's okay," I soothed, even though nothing about this situation was okay. "We're here now. We'll protect you." As if in response to my words, a low growl rumbled through the clearing. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, deep and guttural, but with an almost mechanical edge to it. Vanessa went rigid in my arms. "They're here," she whispered. I turned slowly and felt my heart stop. Emerging from the shadows were three figures. They were vaguely humanoid in shape, but everything about them was wrong. They stood at least 8 feet tall, with limbs that were too long and too thin. Their skin, if you could call it that, seemed to shift and ripple like oil on water. But it was their faces that made me want to scream. Where there should have been features, there was only a smooth, featureless expanse, broken only by those terrible, glowing yellow eyes. Greg moved to stand between us and the creatures, brandishing a large branch like a club. "Stay back!" he yelled, his voice cracking with fear. The creatures paused, cocking their heads in an unsettlingly bird-like manner. Then as one they opened their mouths, splitting their blank faces in horrific too wide grins filled with needle-sharp teeth. And they began to speak. The sound that came from their mouths was like nothing I'd ever heard before. It was a cacophony of discordant tones, screeches, and clicks, underlaid with a deep vibration that I could feel in my bones. Somehow, impossibly, I could understand them. "You do not belong here," they said, their 3 voices blending into one. "This place is not for your kind." "Please," I begged, clutching Vanessa tighter. "We just want to leave. Let us go, and we'll never come back." The creatures seemed to consider this for a moment. Then, "No, you have seen too much, you know too much, you must join us." With that, they began to advance, moving with a fluidity that defied physics. Greg swung his makeshift club, but it passed right through the nearest creature as if it were made of smoke. "Run!" I screamed, half dragging Vanessa as we fled the clearing. We crashed through the forest, blind with terror. I could hear the creatures pursuing us, their unearthly shrieks growing closer by the second. Suddenly the ground disappeared from beneath my feet. We were falling, tumbling down a steep incline. I lost my grip on Vanessa, heard Greg cry out in pain, and then everything went black. I awoke to complete darkness and the taste of dirt in my mouth. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was or what had happened. Then it all came rushing back. The creatures, the chase, the fall. "Greg?" I called out, my voice hoarse. "Vanessa?" "I'm here," came Greg's pained reply from somewhere to my left. "I think my ankle's busted. Can't see a damn thing." I fumbled for the flashlight in my pocket, praying it hadn't been broken in the fall. To my immense relief, it flickered to life when I pressed the button. We were in some kind of underground cavern. The beam of my flashlight revealed rough stone walls slick with moisture, and a floor littered with rocks and debris. Greg was propped up against one wall, grimacing as he held his ankle. "Vanessa," I called again, swinging the light around. There was no sign of her. "She must have landed somewhere else," Greg said, voicing the fear I didn't want to acknowledge. I helped Greg to his feet, letting him lean on me for support. "We need to find her and get out of here." As we moved deeper into the cavern, I noticed something strange. The walls were becoming smoother, more uniform, and then we turned a corner and found ourselves in what could only be described as a tunnel. It was perfectly cylindrical, its walls a smooth, polished black material that seemed to absorb our flashlight's beam. Stranger still, there were symbols etched into the walls at regular intervals, complex geometric patterns that hurt my eyes if I looked at them too long. "What is this place?" Greg whispered, his earlier skepticism completely evaporated. I shook my head at a loss for words. This went beyond anything I could have imagined, beyond any rational explanation. We followed the tunnel, having no better option. It sloped gently downward, leading us deeper underground. The air grew colder, and I could hear a faint humming sound that seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. After what felt like hours of walking, we came to a junction where our tunnel intersected with several others. Each was identical, disappearing into darkness in both directions. "Great," Greg muttered. "Now what?" Before I could respond, we heard it. Vanessa's voice, echoing faintly from one of the tunnels. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please, help me." Without hesitation, we plunged down the tunnel her voice had come from. The slope grew steeper, and soon we were half running, half sliding deeper into the earth. We burst into a vast chamber, so large that our flashlight couldn't illuminate the far walls or ceiling. In the center stood a massive structure, a pyramid of the same black material as the tunnels, covered in the same dizzying symbols. And there, at the base of the pyramid, was Vanessa. She was on her knees, head bowed, surrounded by a group of the creatures we had seen in the forest. As we entered, every head turned toward us. The creatures' yellow eyes gleamed in the darkness, and I felt the weight of their alien gazes like a physical force. One of them stepped forward, its form seeming to ripple and shift as it moved. When it spoke, its voice reverberated through the chamber, filled with harmonics that made my teeth ache. "You should not have come here," it said, "but now that you have, you must understand. You must see." It reached out with one impossibly long arm, its fingers almost brushing my forehead. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there. But I was frozen in place, unable to move or speak. The creature's glowing eyes filled my vision, and suddenly I was somewhere else entirely. I saw flashes of other worlds, of civilizations rise and fall across the vastness of space and time. I saw beings of pure energy and living stars, creatures that defied comprehension and reshaped reality with a thought. And I saw Earth, but not as we knew it. I saw the true history of our planet, the eons of manipulation and experimentation by forces beyond our understanding. I saw the role Mount Shasta played, a gateway, a meeting place, a nexus of realities. When the visions faded, I found myself on my knees, gasping for breath. Greg was beside me, his face ashen, eyes wide with the knowledge that had been forced upon him. The creature stood over us, its featureless face somehow conveying both pity and resolve. "Now you know," it said. "Now you understand why you cannot leave, why you must join us." I looked at Vanessa, saw the resignation in her eyes, and knew that she had already accepted this fate. But as I knelt there on the cold stone floor, the weight of cosmic truth crushing down on me, a small, defiant part of me refused to give in. We had come this far. We had faced unimaginable horrors, and I was not ready to surrender. I met the creature's gaze, my voice steadier than I felt as I said, "No, we understand, but we do not accept. We are leaving, all of us, and you will not stop us." The chamber fell silent, the air thick with tension. I had no idea if my words would have any effect, if these beings could even comprehend human defiance. But sometimes, even in the face of the impossible, courage is all we have left. The silence stretched on, heavy and oppressive. I could feel the weight of countless alien gazes upon us, judging, considering. My heart hammered in my chest, but I forced myself to stand tall, to meet their stares with unwavering determination. Finally, the lead creature spoke again, its voice a discordant symphony that sent shivers down my spine. "Your defiance is unexpected," it said. "In all our millennia of watching, of guiding, of shaping your kind, we have rarely encountered such resistance in the face of revelation." I felt a flicker of hope at these words. Maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. "We are more than you give us credit for," I said, my voice growing stronger. "We may be young, we may be ignorant of the greater cosmos, but we are not without strength. Our free will, our capacity to choose our own path, that is our power." The creature tilted its head, an unsettlingly human gesture from such an alien being. "And what would you do with this choice, Hannah Ward? You have seen the truth of reality. How can you return to your small life knowing what you now know?" I glanced at Greg, who nodded slightly, then at Vanessa, whose eyes had begun to clear, a spark of her old self returning. "We'll find a way," I said. "That's what humans do. We adapt, we grow, we carry on. And maybe, just maybe, we'll use this knowledge to make our world a little better, a little wiser." The chamber filled with a low humming as the creatures communicated among themselves in frequencies beyond human hearing. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the intensity of their debate. After what felt like an eternity, the lead creature turned back to us. "Your argument has merit," it conceded. "Perhaps we have underestimated your species' capacity for growth. We will allow you to leave, but know this. The knowledge we have imparted can never be fully forgotten. It will shape your lives in ways you cannot yet comprehend." Relief flooded through me, so intense it made my knees weak, but I knew we weren't out of danger yet. "Thank you," I said cautiously. "How do we get back?" The creature gestured towards one of the tunnels. "That path will lead you back to the surface, but be warned, the journey will not be easy. The veil between realities is thin here, and you may experience distortions." I helped Greg to his feet, then reached out to Vanessa. She hesitated for a moment before taking my hand, allowing me to pull her up. "Whatever happens," I said to them both, "we stick together. Agreed?" They nodded, and together we turned towards the tunnel. As we stepped into the passageway, I heard the creature's voice one last time, echoing in my mind rather than my ears. "Remember, Hannah Ward, remember and watch the skies." The journey back was a nightmare of shifting perspectives and impossible geometries. The tunnel seemed to twist and turn in ways that defied physics, and more than once I found myself walking on the ceiling or sideways along a wall. Strange visions flickered at the edges of my perception, glimpses of other worlds, other times, other possibilities. I saw versions of myself living different lives, making different choices. I saw Earth as it might have been, as it might yet be. Through it all, I clung to Greg and Vanessa, anchoring myself in their presence, in the solidity of human touch amidst the chaos of warping reality. After what could have been hours or days, we stumbled out into the pre-dawn light of the forest. The familiar scent of pine and earth had never been so welcome. We made our way back to the campsite in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to process the incomprehensible experiences we had endured. The RV was where we had left it, looking absurdly normal after everything we had seen. Without discussion, we piled in, and to my immense relief, the engine started on the first try. As we drove down the mountain, leaving Mount Shasta behind, I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. We had survived. We were going home. But I knew with a certainty that went bone deep that our lives would never be the same. The knowledge we had gained, the truths we had glimpsed, they would stay with us forever, shaping our perceptions and our choices in ways we couldn't yet fathom. In the years that followed, we tried to resume our normal lives. Greg threw himself into his photography with a new passion, capturing images that seemed to hint at the deeper realities we had glimpsed. Vanessa became an advocate for environmental causes, driven by a profound understanding of Earth's true importance in the cosmic scheme. As for me, I left my advertising job and began writing. Fiction at first, stories that tried to capture some fragment of what we had experienced. Later, as I grew bolder, I started a blog about unexplained phenomena and cosmic mysteries. It gained a small but dedicated following, and I like to think that maybe, just maybe, I'm helping to prepare others for the truths that are out there. We stay in touch, the three of us. We meet once a year, usually around the anniversary of our trip. We don't talk much about what happened. Words seem inadequate to describe it. But there's an understanding between us, a shared knowledge that both binds us together and sets us apart from the rest of humanity. Sometimes, on clear nights, I find myself standing outside looking up at the stars. I remember the creature's final words to me, "Remember and watch the skies." And I do. I watch and I wonder and I wait. Because I know now that we are not alone, that the universe is vaster and stranger and more wonderful than we could ever have imagined. And that knowledge, terrifying as it sometimes is, also fills me with a profound sense of hope. Whatever comes next, whatever truths are yet to be revealed, I know that humanity has the strength to face it. We are more than we seem, more than perhaps even we ourselves realize. And so I watch and I remember and I prepare for the day when the skies open once again and the next chapter of our cosmic journey begins. Growing up in Southern California, I was always aware of the unique geography that surrounded us. The Inland Empire, where I spent my childhood, sat about 60 to 90 miles east of Los Angeles, nestled near the foothills of the San Bernardino Mountains. It was a place of stark contrasts, where the urban sprawl of the city gave way to rugged wilderness within a matter of hours. One of the things you often hear about Southern California is that you can go surfing and skiing on the same day. While it sounds like an exaggeration with light traffic, it's actually possible. This proximity to both ocean and mountains shaped my childhood in ways I'm still discovering. My father, whom I'll call Jack, was what you'd call a true mountain man. It's hard to overstate just how at home he was in the wilderness. The mountains weren't just a place he visited, they were an integral part of who he was. Throughout his life, he had spent countless hours exploring every nook and cranny of the local mountain ranges. He knew every back road, every service road, every trail like the back of his hand. He even possessed a specialized bump key that allowed him to unlock Forest Service roadblocks, a fact that both impressed and slightly unnerved me as a child. Jack's love for the mountains was something he was determined to pass on to me. When I was young, he enrolled me in the Boy Scouts, hoping I would develop the same wilderness skills and appreciation for nature that he had. Despite my inclination towards city life, I'm grateful for the experiences scouting gave me. The time spent in the wilderness with my father and fellow scouts taught me invaluable lessons about survival, teamwork, and respect for nature. Looking back now, I realize that those early experiences in the mountains also exposed me to the mysteries and unexplained phenomena that sometimes occur in the depths of the wilderness. Two incidents in particular stand out in my memory. Experiences that challenged my understanding of the natural world and left me with questions that persist to this day. The first incident occurred during a Boy Scout camping trip in the San Bernardino Mountains. I was around 12 years old at the time, old enough to appreciate the beauty of the wilderness, but young enough to still be awed by its mysteries. Our troop had embarked on an ambitious hike, starting at 6 a.m. and trekking until sunset to reach our campsite. It was a grueling journey, especially for some of the younger scouts, but the sense of accomplishment when we finally reached our destination was palpable. Our campsite was nestled deep in the woods, far from any signs of civilization. As was our custom, my father and I set up our tent at the edge of the camp, a good 50 meters from the central campfire. We always did this to escape the noise of the younger scouts, who often stayed up late into the night, their excited chatter echoing through the camp. That night, as we settled into our mummy bags, exhausted from the day's hike, neither of us had any inkling of the strange events that were about to unfold. The forest around us was quiet, the kind of deep silence you only find far from the constant hum of city life. It was a peaceful silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. We had just gotten comfortable, the warmth of our sleeping bags a welcome respite from the cool mountain air when we heard it. A sound that didn't belong, a sound that immediately set my nerves on edge. It was the click of rock against rock, coming from the ridge above us, perhaps 50 to 100 meters up from our position in the valley. Now, my father had always been a firm believer in Sasquatch, or Bigfoot as it's commonly known. While I was more skeptical, I couldn't deny that there were things in the wilderness that defied easy explanation. The vastness of the American wilderness, with its unexplored corners and dense forests, certainly seemed capable of hiding secrets from human eyes. As soon as we heard the sound, my father reached for the radio to contact another scout leader. His voice was low and tense as he asked if any of the adults had gone off into the woods. The response came back negative. Everyone was accounted for. This wasn't a popular trail, and the likelihood of other hikers being in the area at night was slim to none. With that possibility eliminated, we fell silent, straining our ears to catch any further sounds. It was then that I noticed something else, something that sent a chill down my spine. The usual nighttime chorus of insects and animals had fallen silent. The forest around us was unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation. We lay there in our tent, every sense on high alert. I could hear my own heartbeat, the blood rushing in my ears. The silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional click of rocks from the ridge. These weren't small pebbles being disturbed by a passing animal. The sound suggested larger rocks, too heavy for an average person to manipulate easily. As we listened, the rock clicking continued, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but always with a deliberate rhythm that seemed almost communicative. My father whispered to me, his voice barely audible. "Remember what I told you about Sasquatch? They're not violent, but they are territorial. This could be a warning." His words did little to calm my racing heart. I had grown up hearing his stories about Bigfoot, about the mysterious creatures that supposedly roamed the deep forests. I had always half believed them, in the way that children believe in magic and monsters. But now, lying in that tent with the strange sounds echoing around us, those stories took on a new, terrifying reality. The rock clicking continued for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, just as we thought it might be over, we heard something that made my blood run cold. The sound of rocks being flung off the ridge, crashing down into the valley below. The impact suggested these weren't small stones, but sizable rocks being thrown with considerable force. The valley had a drop of about 30 to 50 meters, not a sheer cliff but a steep slope. The strength required to throw rocks that distance was far beyond human capability. As each rock crashed down, I felt my heart rate spike. What kind of creature were we dealing with? Then, as suddenly as it had started, the commotion ceased. The forest fell into an eerie silence once again. We lay there, barely breathing, waiting for the next sound. Minutes ticked by and nothing happened. Just as we began to relax, thinking perhaps whatever it was had moved on, we heard something that defies explanation to this day. The sound of a tree being ripped from the ground. It came from about 75 meters away and 30 meters above our elevation. The valley's acoustics carried the sound clearly to our tent. I could hear the ripping of roots, the cracking of wood, the shower of dirt and rocks as the tree was wrenched from the earth. It was a sound of raw, primal strength, a display of power that sent waves of terror through my body. In that moment, huddled in our tent with only a thin layer of fabric between us and whatever was out there, I felt a fear unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just the fear of physical harm, but a deeper, more primal fear, the fear of the unknown, of forces beyond our understanding or control. The tree-ripping sound was the last we heard that night. After that, silence reigned, broken only by the pounding of my own heart. Neither of us slept much, both too keyed up by what we had heard. When dawn finally broke, it was a relief to see the familiar light of day streaming through the tent fabric. The next morning, we hiked up to the ridge to investigate. What we found only deepened the mystery. There were large rocks that had been cracked open, as if smashed together with great force. We found an area where it looked like a tree had indeed been uprooted, though the tree itself was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps the most unsettling discovery was the tufts of thick hair we found caught in the bark of several trees. The hair was coarse and long, unlike anything I'd seen before. When we got close to examine it, a rank odor assaulted our noses, a smell like garbage left too long in the sun, mixed with something musky and animal. The ground was too hard for any clear footprints, but we noticed a pattern of broken branches on the surrounding trees, up to about 8 feet high. Whatever had passed through here was large and didn't seem to care about the trail it left behind. As we stood there, surveying the scene, I felt a weight settle over me. The evidence before us suggested something far outside my understanding of the natural world had been here, something large, powerful, and intelligent enough to use tools and communicate through sound. My father and the other scout leaders exchanged meaningful looks. Without much discussion, a decision was made. We had disturbed something here, crossed an invisible boundary. It was time to move on. We packed up camp quickly and quietly, careful not to alarm the younger scouts who remained blissfully unaware of the night's events. As we hiked out that day, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. The forest that had seemed so welcoming just a day before now felt alien and threatening. I knew that whatever had been on that ridge last night was still out there, watching, waiting. This experience marked a turning point in my relationship with the wilderness. It opened my eyes to the possibility that there were things out there beyond our current understanding. While I never became the true believer my father was, I could no longer dismiss the stories of strange encounters in the woods as mere fantasy or misidentification. The incident also taught me a profound respect for the unknown. We had entered a domain that wasn't ours, and something had made it clear we weren't welcome. It was a humbling reminder of our place in the natural world, not as conquerors or masters, but as guests in a realm far older and more mysterious than we often acknowledge. As we drove home from that camping trip, the mountains looming in the rearview mirror, I knew I would never look at them quite the same way again. They were still beautiful, still awe-inspiring, but now they also held a hint of something else, a reminder of the thin veil between the world we think we know and the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. Little did I know that this experience was just the first of 2 encounters that would challenge my perception of reality and leave me questioning the true nature of the wilderness I thought I knew so well. The second incident occurred several years later when I was in my late teens. By this time, I had accompanied my father on countless hikes and camping trips. I had honed my wilderness skills, becoming more confident in my ability to navigate the challenges of the mountains. Yet nothing could have prepared me for what we encountered on San Bernardino Peak. This particular trip was special. My father was determined to reach the summit where he had spread his own father's ashes back in 1987, just a few months after I was born. My grandfather, a World War II veteran, had been a larger-than-life figure in our family lore. He had served as a B-17 flying fortress mechanic in England, often volunteering for dangerous missions as a gunner when they were short on men. He had even flown in gliders by night into France to repair downed bombers. His legacy loomed large in our family, and this pilgrimage to his final resting place held deep significance for both my father and me. We had attempted to reach the summit several times before, but my father, now in his 40s and struggling with high blood pressure, had always been forced to turn back around 8,500 feet. This time, however, he was on a new medication and felt confident he could make it. There was a determination in his eyes that morning as we set out, a fire that told me nothing would stop him from reaching his goal this time. The day dawned bright and clear, promising perfect hiking weather. As we began our ascent, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. This wasn't just a hike. It was a journey to connect with our family history, to pay respects to a man I had never known, but whose influence I felt every day through my father. As we climbed higher, the air grew thinner and cooler, but the sun beat down on us with increasing intensity. Above the clouds and smog, the atmosphere takes on a different quality. The air feels cleaner, crisper, but the sun's rays are more direct and punishing. It's a combination that can lull inexperienced hikers into a false sense of security. In our eagerness to reach the summit and our desire to travel light, we had made a critical error in our preparation. We had only brought 2 large water bottles, severely underestimating our needs for the challenging climb ahead. As we pushed on, the water in our bottles dwindled alarmingly fast. About 3/4 of the way up the mountain, we faced a crisis. Our water was gone, and we were still a considerable distance from the summit. We stood at a literal and figurative crossroads. Should we push on, risking dehydration but potentially achieving our goal? Or should we turn back, admitting defeat but ensuring our safety? It was at this moment that my father remembered something. A mountain spring he claimed was not far from our location. With the confidence of a man who had spent his life exploring these mountains, he suggested we detour to refill our bottles. We had water-purifying tablets with us, so the risk of waterborne parasites wasn't a concern. Buoyed by this new hope, we left the main trail and began picking our way down a less defined path towards where my father believed the spring to be. The going was rough, the terrain uneven and treacherous. Every step felt like a gamble, our footing uncertain on the loose scree and hidden roots. After what felt like an eternity of careful descent, we reached the location where the spring should have been. But instead of the life-giving water we desperately needed, we found only a dry depression in the rock. The spring had run dry. The disappointment was crushing. We stood there, staring at the barren ground, the reality of our situation sinking in. We were now off the main trail without water and had expended precious energy on a fruitless detour. The situation had gone from challenging to potentially dangerous. With no other choice, we began the arduous climb back to the main trail. Every step was a struggle. The sun seemed to beat down even more fiercely, and the air felt thinner than ever. I found myself sucking the sweat from my shirt just to moisten my parched tongue. My father, despite his determination, was clearly struggling. His face was red, and his breathing labored. As we finally regained the main trail, the full gravity of our situation hit us. We were alone on the mountain. We hadn't seen any other hikers all day, and there had been no cars in the trailhead parking lot when we started. We were at least 1,000 feet up from where any help might be found, and both of us were showing signs of dehydration. We stood there catching our breath and trying to come up with a plan. The summit, our goal, seemed impossibly far away now. Yet the thought of descending without reaching it, of failing to complete this pilgrimage to my grandfather's resting place, was equally daunting. It was in this moment of indecision and growing despair that something happened that I still struggle to explain to this day. As we stood there weighing our options, we heard footsteps coming down the trail from the direction of the summit. At first I thought the dehydration was causing me to hallucinate, but as I looked at my father, I saw the same look of surprise and confusion on his face. Someone was coming down the trail towards us. As the figure came into view, I felt a strange sense of unreality wash over me. It was an older man with gray hair and a short gray beard. He wore a blue bandana wrapped around his head and carried hiking poles. But what struck me most was the way he moved. Despite the rough terrain, he seemed to glide down the trail with an ease that bordered on the supernatural. The man came to a stop in front of us, a serene smile on his weathered face. "Lovely day, isn't it, fellas?" he said as casually as if we had bumped into each other on a city street rather than high up on a remote mountain trail. My father, always quick to recover, managed a chuckle. "Did you sleep up there the night before, or are you just the fastest hiker alive?" he asked, a note of friendly banter in his voice that didn't quite mask his bewilderment. The old man's response was cryptic, delivered with a mysterious smile. "Oh no, I've seen what I've come here to see, and I'll be off shortly," he said. The phrasing struck me as odd, and I found myself committing his exact words to memory. His piercing gaze swept over us, taking in our obvious state of exhaustion and distress. "You boys look pretty thirsty," he observed. "You ran out of water? The mountain can be quite deceiving on a hot day like this, right?" Before my father could respond fully, the old man continued. "And you both went down to that spring over yonder and found it dry," he said, pointing unerringly in the direction we had just come from. My father and I exchanged stunned glances. The spring was well hidden, and my father had often boasted that probably no one alive besides him knew of its existence. The old man's knowledge of our predicament was unsettling, to say the least. He continued, "Well, I've got about a gallon of water here in my pack. Probably not enough for you to summit today, but enough to get you hydrated and down the mountain." As he spoke, he produced a gallon jug of water from his backpack. The sight of it made my parched throat ache with longing. "Drink it in good health," he said, handing it over. "And come prepared next time, okay? I don't reckon I'll always be around to save your arses." We took the water gratefully, thanking him profusely. As we drank, savoring each life-giving sip, the old man watched us with an enigmatic smile. Then, with a nod and a grrr sound, he continued down the trail, moving with that same uncanny grace we had noticed earlier. After filling our bottles and drinking our fill, we began our descent, both disappointed at not reaching the summit, but relieved to be heading to safety. As we rounded a bend that led to a series of long switchbacks, we expected to see the old man ahead of us on the trail. This section was above the tree line, offering an unobstructed view for quite a distance. But to our astonishment, the trail was empty. There was no sign of the old man anywhere. Given his age and the difficult terrain, it seemed impossible that he could have descended the switchback so quickly, even with his unusually fluid gait. My father and I exchanged looks of disbelief. Without a word, we quickened our pace down the mountain, a shared sense of unease spurring us on. The encounter had left us both shaken, confronted with something that defied logical explanation. To this day, my father and I remain convinced that the man we met on the mountain was more than just a fellow hiker. Some might call it divine intervention, others a hallucination brought on by dehydration and altitude. But the water he gave us was real enough, and it undoubtedly saved us from a potentially dangerous situation. We eventually did make it to the summit on another trip, this time well prepared with ample water and supplies. As we stood there, honoring the memory of my grandfather and taking in the breathtaking views, I couldn't help but think of our mysterious benefactor. Had he been some kind of guardian spirit, watching over those who ventured into these mountains? Or was there a more mundane explanation that we were simply unable to see? These experiences in the mountains, the unexplained sounds in the night during our camping trip, and the enigmatic old man on San Bernardino Peak, have stayed with me over the years. They serve as reminders of the mysteries that still exist in our world, even in places we think we know well. The mountains, I've come to realize, are more than just geological formations. They are keepers of secrets, realms where the boundaries between the known and the unknown can blur. My father's deep connection to these wild places suddenly made more sense to me. It wasn't just about the physical challenge or the beauty of nature. It was about the possibility of encountering something beyond our everyday understanding, of brushing up against mysteries that defy easy explanation. These experiences have shaped my perspective on the natural world and our place in it. They've taught me that there's more to the wilderness than what we can see or easily explain. They've instilled in me a deep respect for the unknown and a humility in the face of forces we don't fully comprehend. As I've grown older and ventured out on my own hiking and camping trips, I've carried these lessons with me. I approach the wilderness with a mix of excitement and reverence, always prepared for the unexpected. I've learned to listen more closely to the sounds of the forest, to pay attention to those moments when the natural world seems to hold its breath. I've also come to appreciate the wisdom in my father's approach to the mountains. His belief in Sasquatch, which I once dismissed as fanciful, now seems to me a way of acknowledging the mysteries of the wilderness. Whether or not Bigfoot exists as a flesh and blood creature, the concept represents all that is unknown and untamed in our world. The incident with the old man on San Bernardino Peak has made me more open to the idea that there are forces at work in the world that we don't fully understand. It's given me a deeper appreciation for the thin line between the rational and the inexplicable, and how quickly that line can blur in the wilderness. These experiences have also strengthened the bond between my father and me. We share a secret knowledge, a set of experiences that others might find hard to believe. When we're out in the mountains together, there's an unspoken understanding between us, a shared awareness of the potential for mystery and wonder around every bend in the trail. As I reflect on these incidents now, years later, I'm struck by how they've influenced my life. They've made me more open-minded, more willing to consider possibilities beyond the readily explainable. They've deepened my respect for nature and heightened my sense of wonder at the world around us. But perhaps most importantly, they've taught me the value of humility in the face of the unknown. The mountains have shown me that no matter how much we think we know, there's always more to learn, more to discover. They've reminded me that we are small parts of a vast, complex world, much of which remains beyond our full understanding. These lessons have served me well, not just in my outdoor adventures, but in all aspects of life. They've taught me to approach challenges with an open mind, to be prepared for the unexpected, and to find wonder in the mysteries that surround us. As I continue to explore the wilderness, I carry these experiences with me. They've become part of who I am, shaping my perspective and influencing my interactions with the natural world. And while I may never fully understand what happened on those 2 occasions in the San Bernardino Mountains, I'm grateful for the glimpse they provided into the profound mysteries that still exist in our world. In the end, these experiences have reinforced what my father always knew, that the mountains are not just places of physical challenge and natural beauty, but realms of mystery and potential revelation. They are places where, if we approach them with respect and an open mind, we might just encounter something that changes our understanding of the world and our place in it. And so every time I lace up my hiking boots and head into the wilderness, I do so with a sense of anticipation, not just for the views I might see or the physical challenges I might overcome, but for the possibilities of what I might encounter. For in the depths of the forest or on the wind-swept mountain peaks, there's always the chance that I might once again brush up against the inexplicable, the mysterious, the unknown. These are the gifts the mountains have given me: a deeper respect for nature, a more open mind, and a profound appreciation for the mysteries that still exist in our world. And for that, I will always be grateful. The California desert has always held a certain allure for me. Its vast, seemingly endless expanses of sand and rock, punctuated by hidden oases and otherworldly geological formations, have a way of making you feel both insignificant and alive. It's a place of extremes, where the scorching heat of the day gives way to bone-chilling cold at night, where life clings tenaciously to existence in the most unlikely places. It was this fascination with the desert that led me and a group of friends to plan a hiking trip to Fossil Falls, just outside of Ridgecrest, California, about 25 years ago. None of us could have anticipated that this adventure would lead us into a mystery that continues to haunt me to this day. Our group consisted of 4 of us: myself, my best friend, his girlfriend, and our mutual friend. We were all in our early 20s, full of energy and eager to explore. My best friend was the most experienced hiker among us, having grown up in a family that regularly went on camping trips. His girlfriend was newer to hiking but enthusiastic about the outdoors. Our other friend was our resident jokester, always ready with a quip to lighten the mood. As for me, I fell somewhere in the middle. I enjoyed outdoor activities but wouldn't have called myself an expert by any means. We set out early on a Saturday morning in late spring. The drive from Los Angeles to Ridgecrest took about 3 hours, during which we watched the landscape transform from urban sprawl to rugged desert. As we neared our destination, the anticipation in the car was palpable. We'd all seen photos of Fossil Falls online, but nothing could prepare us for the reality of the place. Fossil Falls is a geological wonder, a remnant of the Pleistocene era, when water from the Owens River carved intricate patterns into the basaltic lava flow. The result is a series of smooth, undulating rock formations that look more like abstract sculptures than natural phenomena. As we parked our car and gathered our backpacks, I remember feeling a sense of awe at the alien landscape before us. The hike down into the falls was relatively easy, though we had to watch our footing on the smooth, worn rock. We took our time, pausing often to take photos and marvel at the otherworldly formations around us. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rock face, creating an ever-changing landscape of light and dark. It wasn't until we reached the bottom of the falls and entered the opening of the canyon that things took a turn for the bizarre. The first thing that hit us was the smell. It was faint at first, barely noticeable over the scent of sun-baked rock and desert vegetation. But as we continued our hike, it grew stronger. "Do you guys smell that?" my friend's girlfriend asked, wrinkling her nose. We all nodded, looking at each other with a mixture of curiosity and concern. The odor was unmistakable, the sickly sweet smell of decay. Probably just a dead animal, my best friend suggested, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. It happens out here all the time. We continued on, but the smell only intensified. It was becoming difficult to ignore, and I could see the others were as unsettled as I was. There was something deeply wrong about that smell, something that went beyond the normal cycle of life and death in the desert. Maybe we should turn back, I suggested, but curiosity had gotten the better of us. We had come this far, and something in us needed to know the source of that awful stench. As we pressed on, the canyon walls seemed to close in around us. The bright, open expanse of the desert gave way to shadowy, claustrophobic passages. The smell grew stronger with each step, until it was almost overpowering. We pulled our shirts up over our noses in a futile attempt to filter the air. That's when we saw it. In a small clearing ahead, the ground looked different. There were several dark patches on the surface like oil slicks, but they didn't quite look like oil. The earth around these patches appeared disturbed, as if someone had been digging recently. We approached cautiously, our earlier excitement replaced by a growing sense of dread. The smell was so strong here that it made our eyes water. My best friend, always the brave one, stepped forward to investigate. "Guys," he said, his voice muffled by the shirt covering his face, "I think someone's been burying something here." We gathered around, morbid curiosity overcoming our revulsion. The patches on the ground were indeed the result of recent digging. Whatever had been buried was just below the surface. Should we dig?" our jokester friend asked, his usual joking manner completely gone. We looked at each other, uncertain. Part of me wanted to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But another part, the part that had gotten us this far, needed to know. My best friend pulled a small folding shovel from his backpack. "We'll just take a look," he said. "If it's just a dead animal, we'll leave it be and get out of here." He began to dig at one of the patches. The smell, impossibly, grew even stronger. We'd barely gone 6 inches down when he stumbled back, gagging. "Oh God," he choked out. "We need to get out of here, now." We didn't need to be told twice. Whatever was buried there, it wasn't a simple case of a dead desert animal. The smell spoke of something far worse, something that had no place in this beautiful, desolate landscape. As we hurried back the way we came, the reality of what we might have stumbled upon began to sink in. This wasn't just a hike gone wrong. We might be dealing with something far more sinister. "We need to call the police," my friend's girlfriend said as we climbed out of the canyon. No one argued. Once we were back at our car and had cell phone reception, we made the call. The dispatcher seemed skeptical at first, but when we described the location and the smell, her tone changed. She assured us a patrol car would be there soon. We waited by our vehicle, all of us quiet, lost in our own thoughts. The beautiful desert landscape that had so captivated us earlier now seemed ominous, potentially hiding dark secrets beneath its sun-baked surface. When the police car arrived, a single officer stepped out. He introduced himself, his weathered face speaking of years of experience. As we recounted our story, I could see a change come over him. His initial professional detachment gave way to a grim focus that sent chills down my spine. "Show me," he said simply. We led the officer back down into the canyon. As we neared the site, I saw his posture change. He became more alert, his hand resting near his holstered weapon. When the smell hit him, he stopped in his tracks. "Wait here," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. We watched as he approached the disturbed ground. He circled the area, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. Then he pulled out his radio and began speaking rapidly into it. I couldn't make out the words, but the urgency in his tone was clear. When he returned to us, his face was grave. "I'm going to need you folks to head back to your car and wait there," he said. "We're going to have a lot more people coming in soon." "What is it?" my best friend asked. "What did you see?" The officer hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Look," he said, his voice low. "I used to work homicide in LA. That smell. For something to generate that kind of odor, you'd need something big, deer-sized at least, and recently buried." The implication hung in the air, unspoken but understood by all of us. This wasn't just a dead animal. This could be a crime scene. As we made our way back to the parking area, we could hear the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. Police vehicles began to arrive, their sirens cutting through the desert quiet. The peaceful hiking spot we had visited just hours ago was transforming into a hive of law enforcement activity. We were questioned separately by detectives, recounting our story over and over. As the day wore on, we watched as more and more officials arrived. There were people in hazmat suits, forensics teams, even what looked like federal agents in dark suits despite the desert heat. It was well past sunset by the time we were allowed to leave. We were told to expect follow-up calls and were sworn to secrecy about what we had seen. The drive back to Los Angeles was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts about the day's events. Over the next few weeks, we waited anxiously for news. We had been told not to discuss the incident with anyone, but it was hard not to speculate among ourselves. What had we stumbled upon? Was it really what we feared, evidence of a terrible crime? When we finally received a call from the police, the answer we got was far from satisfactory. According to the official report, what we had found was nothing more than some discarded chicken skin and bones. The smell, they claimed, had been exaggerated by the heat and the enclosed space of the canyon. None of us believed it for a second. The memory of that overpowering stench, the grim reaction of the officer, the massive response from law enforcement, none of it lined up with the explanation we were given. But what could we do? We were just a group of hikers who had stumbled upon something we didn't understand. It might have ended there, filed away as a strange and unsettling experience, if not for a chance conversation I had with a coworker a few months later. I had been careful not to discuss the incident following the instructions we had been given. But one day, over lunch, my coworker mentioned he was planning a hiking trip to Fossil Falls. The memory of that day came flooding back, and before I could stop myself, I found myself warning him to be careful. My coworker, sensing there was more to my concern than general hiking safety, pressed for details. Under his persistent questioning, I finally relented and shared a brief version of our experience. I expected skepticism, maybe even laughter. What I didn't expect was the look of concern that crossed his face. He leaned in close, lowering his voice despite the busy cafeteria around us. "Listen," he said. "I've got a friend who works high up in the Department of Forestry Service. Let me run this by him, see what he says." I hesitated, remembering the stern warnings we'd received about discussing the incident, but curiosity won out, and I nodded my agreement. A week passed before my coworker approached me again. This time he looked troubled. He pulled me aside into an empty conference room, checking twice to ensure we were alone before he spoke. "I told my friend about what happened," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Man, I've never heard him react like that before," he said, and I quote, "How did you know about this? You shouldn't know about this, and those guys should forget about it immediately." A chill ran down my spine. The official dismissal of our experience had been unsettling, but this reaction was downright alarming. It confirmed what we had suspected all along. There was more to this story than we were being told. "What do you think it means?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. My coworker shook his head. "I don't know for sure, but it's big. Whatever you guys stumbled upon, it's something they're desperate to keep quiet." Over the next few weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Maybe it was paranoia, but I found myself looking over my shoulder more often, scrutinizing unfamiliar cars on my street. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, but the nagging sense of unease persisted. I reached out to my friends who had been with me that day, curious if they had experienced anything similar. To my surprise, they all reported odd occurrences. One mentioned strange clicks on his phone line. Another swore she'd seen the same nondescript sedan parked outside her apartment several times. Our usually laid-back friend admitted to feeling on edge, like he was constantly being observed. As we pieced together our experiences, a disturbing theory began to take shape. The location of our discovery, the massive law enforcement response, the unconvincing cover story. And now these hints of surveillance. It all pointed to something far more sinister than we had initially imagined. I began to research the area around Fossil Falls more thoroughly. That's when I discovered something that made the pieces start to fall into place. The canyon we had explored that day was not just a remote hiking spot. It was bordered by the China Lake Naval Weapons Center, a vast military installation known for its secretive weapons testing programs. The implications were chilling. If someone had been killed and buried on government land, it would explain the desperate attempt to keep the incident under wraps. The military's involvement would account for the high-level cover-up and the ongoing surveillance we seemed to be experiencing. But who was the victim? And more importantly, who was responsible? These questions haunted me, keeping me awake at night as I turned over the possibilities in my mind. I considered going to the media with our story, but the fear of repercussions held me back. We had no proof beyond our word, and the thought of going up against a government cover-up was terrifying. Plus, there was no guarantee that sharing our story wouldn't put us in even more danger. As the months turned into years, the intensity of our experience faded, but it never truly left us. We moved on with our lives. Careers advanced, relationships changed. We spread out across the country. But that day in Fossil Falls remained a bond between us, a shared secret that we carried. Now, 25 years later, I find myself still pondering the events of that day. The smell, the disturbed earth, the massive response, and the subsequent cover-up. It all feels as vivid as if it happened yesterday. I've never returned to Fossil Falls, and I doubt I ever will. The beauty of the desert has been forever tainted by the memory of what we discovered there. I've come to accept that I may never know the full truth of what happened in that canyon, but I'm certain of one thing. On that spring day 25 years ago, we stumbled upon something that was never meant to be found, a secret buried in the desert, protected by forces far more powerful than we could have imagined. As I write this account, I'm aware of the risks involved in sharing this story, but I believe it's important that the truth, or at least as much of it as we know, comes to light. Perhaps someone out there has a missing piece of this puzzle, or maybe this will encourage others who have had similar experiences to come forward. To this day, I can't look at a map of the California desert without my eyes being drawn to that small dot marking Fossil Falls. It serves as a reminder that even in the vast emptiness of the desert, secrets can be buried, and that sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are those that remain unsolved. The experience has left me with a profound unease about the power structures that govern our world. It's shaken my faith in official narratives and made me question how much of what we're told is really the truth. How many other secrets are out there, buried in remote locations, protected by official denials and shadowy surveillance? I often wonder about that first officer, the one who seemed to understand the gravity of what we had found. Did he face pressure to change his story? Was he part of the cover-up, or was he, like us, silenced by forces beyond his control? And what of the victim, if indeed there was one? Someone's loved one, perhaps, whose fate remains unknown, whose body lies in an unmarked grave in the unforgiving desert. The thought that we might have been close to bringing them justice, only to have it snatched away, is a burden I carry to this day. The incident at Fossil Falls has colored my perception of the world in ways both large and small. I find myself more skeptical of official explanations, more attuned to the possibility of hidden truths beneath the surface of everyday life. It's made me acutely aware of the vast machinery of power that operates just out of sight, shaping our reality in ways we can scarcely imagine. But it's also given me a deep appreciation for the power of bearing witness. Though we were unable to uncover the full truth of what happened that day, the fact that we saw what we saw, that we know what we know, feels significant. It's a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power, individual experiences and testimonies matter. As I conclude this account, I'm struck by the enduring impact of that single day in the desert. What started as a simple hiking trip became a lifelong journey into the heart of a mystery that touches on some of the darkest aspects of human nature and institutional power. To my friends who were there that day, if you're reading this, know that our shared experience has bonded us in a way that few can understand. To that first officer, wherever you are, I hope you've found peace with what you saw that day. And to anyone who might have information about what really happened in that canyon outside Ridgecrest, I urge you to come forward. The truth, no matter how long buried, deserves to see the light of day. As for me, I'll continue to watch and listen, to question and seek understanding. The mystery of Fossil Falls may never be fully solved, but in sharing this story, I hope to keep the search for truth alive. Because in the end, it's not just about what happened in that remote canyon 25 years ago. It's about the larger question of what other secrets might be hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to have the courage to uncover them. The desert, with its vast expanses and hidden canyons, keeps its secrets well. But as our experience shows, even the most carefully buried truths have a way of surfacing, if only we have the courage to look for them. And so, the mystery of Fossil Falls remains, a testament to the power of the unknown, and a reminder that sometimes the most profound discoveries are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers. In the years since our discovery, I've often found myself drawn to stories of other unexplained incidents, particularly those involving remote areas or government land. I've connected with online communities of people who have had similar experiences, hikers, campers, and outdoor enthusiasts who have stumbled upon things they couldn't explain, only to be met with official denials or unconvincing explanations. These stories, while varied in their details, often share common threads: unexpected discoveries, swift and disproportionate responses from authorities, and a lingering sense that the truth has been deliberately obscured. It's both comforting and unsettling to know that our experience at Fossil Falls wasn't unique. I've also delved deeper into researching the China Lake Naval Weapons Center and other military installations in the desert. The more I've learned about the scope and secrecy of these facilities, the more plausible our theory about a government cover-up becomes. The vast, restricted areas of the desert provide the perfect backdrop for activities that those in power might want to keep hidden from public view. There have been moments when I've been tempted to return to Fossil Falls to see if I could uncover any new clues, or perhaps trigger some forgotten memory that might shed light on what really happened that day. But each time, a combination of fear and respect for the unknown has held me back. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, serving as reminders of the limits of our understanding and the vastness of the world around us. As I've grown older, I've come to appreciate the profound impact that day had on shaping my worldview. It taught me to question official narratives, to look beyond the surface of things, and to trust my own experiences even when they conflict with what I'm told is true. It's made me a more critical thinker, a more observant individual, and paradoxically, a more open-minded person when it comes to considering unconventional explanations for seemingly inexplicable events. I sometimes wonder about the long-term consequences of our discovery. Has our silence over the years allowed something sinister to remain hidden? Or did our stumbling upon that site perhaps prevent future incidents, forcing whoever was responsible to be more cautious? These are questions I'll likely never have answers to, but they continue to weigh on my conscience. To those who might read this account and dismiss it as paranoia or an overactive imagination, I can only say this: I hope you never have an experience that shakes your understanding of reality the way ours did. But if you do, I hope you'll have the courage to speak up, to question, to seek the truth no matter how uncomfortable or inconvenient it might be. And to those who might recognize elements of their own experiences in our story, know that you're not alone. The world is full of mysteries, some of which may never be fully understood or explained. But in sharing our stories, in refusing to let these incidents be forgotten or dismissed, we play a crucial role in pushing back against the forces that would keep us in the dark. As I write these final words, I'm acutely aware that this account may bring renewed attention to events that powerful people have worked hard to keep buried. If that's the case, so be it. The truth, no matter how long concealed, has a way of coming to light. And if our experience at Fossil Falls teaches us anything, it's that even in the vastness of the desert, even against the machinery of government secrecy, the human spirit's quest for truth cannot be easily extinguished. The mystery of what we found in that canyon may remain unsolved, but in sharing this story, in keeping the memory of that day alive, we ensure that it's not forgotten. And perhaps someday someone will connect the final dots, uncover the last piece of the puzzle, and bring to light the full truth of what happened in Fossil Falls all those years ago. Until then, I'll continue to watch the desert horizon, to listen for echoes of that day and the whisper of the wind through the canyons, and to remain ever vigilant for signs that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, is fighting its way to the surface. Because in the end, It's not just about solving a mystery. It's about standing up for the principle that in a free society, the truth should never remain hidden, no matter how inconvenient or unsettling it might be.